Few men, I think, have as much experience in martial arts as my current guest today, Sid Gee. Sid, thank you for coming on, man.
Thank you, and happy to be here.
Yeah, sorry, full disclosure, he was supposed to be on last week, but then there was like some like ice, some snow, and then there was like a question of like whether or not we should do the podcast and all that. I apologize. Maybe like
I'm not far away. It all worked out fine.
Yeah. So, but anyway, we made it up today.
Here we are.
Another day where it snowed and everything, but the roads were great. Sid, you've done a lot. You've been a coach. You're a cutman, a business owner, and you've been in this game, combat sports and martial arts, for a tremendous amount of time.
I'm celebrating 50 years.
Wow.
The martial arts 50 years.
Since you started karate, like training in karate.
Yes, and all the stuff
today.
with that.
Wow, 50 years.
And there's very few guys that still do it with 50 years in, especially karate instructors.
It's insane in a great way, not in a negative way. I talked to you beforehand, and I said you have a grand story with lots of, rabbit holes that we could go down, but I wanted to start with the most recent and work our way back.
Sure.
For those that don't know, you were one of the cutmen for Bellator MMA, and in the dissolution of it, and they sold to PFL, you're no longer a cutman for PFL. You're not transitioning.
No.
Right?
The PFL has their own separate
Staff.
crew of cutmen, right? So we're out of that.
What does that leave you then right now? Because I know that you weren't a cutman for just Bellator. I see you all the time in like the local scenes.
I do a lot of local and regional shows, but Bellator was the big show. There's that global, that new fight league the Tyrants in, trying to get into that, but those things just come and go.
Yeah.
They have a lot of money in the beginning, but they last a year or two and they're done.
I was actually talking with someone about that regarding like the competition that the UFC has, and like I was essentially saying that like the amount of money and time that it's going to be necessary in order to genuinely compete with the UFC, no one's going to be willing to do both.
UFC has billions of dollars, so no, nobody can compete.
You're going to have to be comparable in pay for a long period of time. You're going to have to be in the red for like 3 or 4 years, because what you're going to need to do is get the next level of talent to want to come fight for you. And the only way you're going to do that is if the pay is comparable.
I agree.
You can't, I hate saying it this way because I'm a fan, and I think there is a place for some of the quote unquote legends, right?
Sure.
I think there's a market for that, but you can't make a league that you're trying to say is competing against the UFC if all of the fighters that are in that league are like the fighters that have either retired or, have moved on or something like that. You can have that, but it has to be in tandem with something else. It has to be in tandem with actual like up and coming young talent hungry to be the best in the world.
Yeah, what it appears to be is like they have senior golf. This is senior MMA.
Yeah.
I mean, people still love to watch Vanderlei put his head down and go, and all those old timers, but it's just a matter if the company has enough money to sustain it.
And if it's profitable, because that's the other thing too, right? These old timers want a lot of money.
Yeah.
And is the juice worth the squeeze?
Yeah, like before, I heard PFL's bleeding money too.
I'm sure they are.
They used to offer $1 million to the champions. Now it's $500,000. So that tells you something.
Just wanted to take a second to pause the action and just tell you guys, thank you so much for consuming our content. Easy Talk is a passion project. This podcast is just a bunch of like-minded people coming together to produce some cool stuff and talk to some cool people. One of the things I would very much appreciate is if you could possibly like the video or subscribe to the channel, just because it helps us in the algorithm and ultimately to grow, to get more exposure to everybody, including ourselves, and ultimately just make a better product. Take a second, I'd greatly appreciate it, and on with the show. Well, can I say something, and I hope you don't feel this is like an insult, but I thought Bellator and PFL were just vastly inferior in terms of promoting fights. I know when there's going to be a UFC, and I'm not even necessarily keeping my ear to the ground. They do a great job of like instilling it into social media and all these other things. A lot of the fighters are kind of selling themselves. A lot of like, they have now branched out to like, personalities and influencers to like help kind of brand awareness for the UFC. So like, even though I'm not necessarily following the sport as, closely as I once was, I still know when there's going to be a UFC. I know that there's going to be a UFC this weekend, right? So it's one of those things where I never knew when Bellator and PFL were having fights, unless it was local, like when Bellator was coming to St. Louis.
Yes.
Or if it was like some, grandiose main event show, like like Kimbo Slice versus Dada 5000. I knew when that was happening,
Yeah.
right? So
Well, traditionally, we were on Friday nights and UFC Saturday nights, so there's no competition.
yes, there is. It
No,
might
no,
not
no.
be on the
I
same
mean,
night.
we weren't competing on the same day at the same time.
Yeah, but what do you think about my statement? Or I'm curious on where you think my critique lands on. I think that Bellator and PFL do a very poor job of promoting the fights, which is literally their job. They are a
No, you're right,
promotion.
and it comes down to money. You know, UFC has an unlimited bankroll.
You think it's just marketing budget now?
Well, the other thing, remember, UFC used to do fights like every couple of weeks or once. Now they do one every single weekend. So, I mean, it's rare that UFC doesn't have a show.
I've been talking to some fighters, and I was speaking with Jordan Dowdy. The episode hasn't gone live yet, but by the time this comes out, that will. And he was basically saying that while it is a good thing for the fighters that the UFC is having that many fights because you need more fighters on the panel. Like, I think their roster now is like sub 700. They have like close to 700 fighters on the roster, active fighters, right? It's not necessarily a good thing because now it's become oversaturated. Jordan was talking about how back in the day when they had that one pay-per-view that month,
It was the cream of the crop.
everybody was kind of like,
No, you're
"Holy
right.
shit,
Some shows you don't
boys."
even know who the guys are when you see them.
Yeah, but that's the thing, right? It's like, is that necessarily a good thing or a bad thing for the sport?
If you're a true MMA fan, you just want it every weekend. But sometimes, like you say, some fights just that don't pan out. They're not any good.
Yeah,
So, but you don't have to have a name to be a good fighter or have a good fight.
that's very true.
So sometimes it's funny. At Bellator, we would always have dark fights, which guys had to fight after the main event because prelims went too long. And those are sometimes some of the best fights of the night because they're the hometown guys. People came to see them. So you think after the main event, everybody would go home. A lot of people would stay.
I will say this about Bellator, that I think they did one thing that was genius, and that was kind of working with the local promotions for the towns that they would go in.
That's who filled the stands.
This is kind of like a peek into the curtain, like how the sausage is made. I know that when Bellator was in St. Louis, they would essentially work with Shamrock FC, like with Jesse and Rob, and say, hey,
With the
listen,
undercard.
we're going to fill the undercard with your guys. They will fight in our cage under our banner with our lights and production and everything. But they have to have like a certain minimum criteria of ticket sales.
Yes.
And this is where I kind of like, that rubs me the wrong way a little bit. I like that they're using some of the local talent to, kind of pack the stands a little bit. No problem with that whatsoever. And it doesn't have to be televised. You're giving them the platform. It's amazing for the guys. I'm sure they look back on it with reverence. But I don't like that quota, because are you bringing them on to fight or are you bringing them on to sell tickets?
I agree.
Because if it's to sell tickets, you don't need fighters. Work with the influencers, work with St. Louis City, work with the county and everything. We can sell tickets. Stop putting so much onus on the fighters, because like they have to make weight, they have to be healthy, they have to actually perform, they have to make sure that they're doing all the things for camp and all this other stuff. And then they have to be ticket sellers. I think it's just too much to ask.
It is. It's tough. When I coached with the World Combat League, they would send a team of people out about a month before the show. They'd go into bars and restaurants, give free tickets away. They'd get on the radio. We had packed houses everywhere we went.
Because they had marketing budget. They actually promoted.
They went on the
fight.
radio and gave free tickets and told people, and they gave them a month so people had time to prepare and get ready. It was a great deal, but these big companies, they don't do it.
I think if I give that critique to PFL and Bellator about me not knowing when the fights are, and with the UFC, I know that there's going to be a fight almost every other weekend or every weekend. The rub to that is, I think after Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor, the UFC was incredibly sensitive to how big they allowed names to get. Because for the briefest of moments, you had fighters like my dad knew who Conor McGregor was, but didn't know like when the next UFC would be, right? And I think in a way, the UFC, if Bellator and PFL were really bad at promoting the fights and the fighters, the UFC is good at promoting the fights and the brand, the UFC, but not necessarily the fighters. Because like, as you say, some of the undercard, you might not know who any of these guys are.
Yeah.
Why? Why don't we know who any of these guys are? You
One
have
thing-
the budget.
One
you
thing
have
about
the money.
Bellator, Scott Coker is a karate man under Ernie Reyes Jr., and he started out promoting kickboxing, then it's all evolved. And Bjorn Rebney was the original
Founder of Bellator.
founder, the tournament type thing.
Wasn't he also in that lawsuit, the class action lawsuit with some of the UFC fighters? I believe he lumped himself in with
I don't
that.
know. But The day they fight, when Scott Coker sold Strikeforce, he had a 3-year no-compete clause. The day he was eligible, they fired Brebney and they brought Scott in.
Wow.
So our ratings went way up. And
Was that back when Bellator was owned by Viacom?
Yes.
Yes, okay. They had the Viacom money.
And Scott's an honest guy, and if he says something to you, he means it. A lot of promoters will say stuff and they can't do it, not maybe because they lie to you, it's just it can't happen. Scott's an honest guy, and if he says, I'm going to do this, he makes it work.
How long have you worked with him? Did you ever do any cutman work in the Strikeforce days?
No.
No. When did you start?
I've been with Bellator 13 years.
So okay, so then you started doing being a cutman 13 years ago.
I've been a cutman way before that, but with Bellator.
So that's my question.
Yeah.
How long have you started, or how long were you in the game of being a cutman?
You know, the word cutman wasn't even a word other in boxing 30 years ago. There was never a cutman for MMA because there was no MMA. So I always used to wrap my hands. I used to wrap my fighters' hands. I'd fix their nose. So I was learning to be a cutman along the way. But there never really was the term cutman for, karate guys or whatever, or kickboxers. So when MMA came out, people don't know this, but the number one job of a cutman is to wrap hands.
Yeah.
It's an art. I have wrapped thousands of hands, and I can say I've only had like 5 or 6 broken hands.
Well, that's also kind of like a bias because it's like, dude, what if guys don't know how to fucking throw punches?
Well, you're exactly right.
You could wrap someone's hands as...
If you punch his head or your wrist is wrong, you're going to break your hand.
Or if you just have poor form.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
right,
you're doing it
right,
at an angle or whatever.
Right. But that's the true art. Fixing cuts and stuff, you paramedic, you can learn that. But wrapping hands is the true art.
Can I tell you something? And I'm curious to see if you would think I was crazy. The last couple of fights that I had, the last like 4 or 5 professional fights, I didn't wrap my hands at all.
No, it's not crazy at all. Are you more grappler than striker?
Yes, but I'll tell you why I did it. It wasn't about even that. It was because of the hand wraps, I would have to get a bigger glove. So like I went from like small to mediums because of the hand wraps. And then when I didn't do the hand wraps, sometimes depending on like how much fluid I put back in, I could even fit into the extra small.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was a competitive advantage.
Yeah.
I mean,
There's not much padding there.
Dude, there's the glove weighs 4 ounces, but the amount of padding between my knuckles, and that's the other thing is like, yes, it's a trade-off, right? I'm giving up some of that protection and some of that constriction.
Yes.
But I'm also gaining that, dude, I could feel my knuckles on their face. I could feel the bones in their cheek. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, this is kind of like a cheat code. Do you think that is crazy that some fighters, such as myself, wouldn't necessarily wear wraps?
No.
Have their hands wrapped?
No, the Dagestani guys, the grapplers, they do minimal wrap.
Because they want to be able to open and close their hands a little bit better.
Right. But what's funny, Dean Lassiter, who was one of the head cut guys with Matt Marsden, I was number 3 guy. He said, Sid, good luck when you wrap Russians. And he smiled, and I had no idea what he meant. These Russians had never had their hands wrapped. They can't afford the tape. How do you think tape does in 120-degree weather? You can't even pull it off the spool, And so the first time I wrapped them, I can do a guy in 15. It took like 30, 40 minutes. Like he didn't know what was good. So we had to show these guys what a wrap felt like and what it did for them. Then they would trim it. But eventually they got on board, but they didn't know what it was about. And Tito Ortiz, Hoist Gracie, when he fought for us, they would just put a few wraps around their knuckles. So, Hoist wasn't a big striker, more of a grappler, but if you practice, you know how to punch well with bare fist, you can get by with it.
I think so too.
But if you wrap your hand and you get a good sized glove, you can punch through a wall with it because it's so reinforced.
That's the problem. If it was boxing, I would wrap them all day.
Sure.
The problem was 2-pronged. Yes, to your point, I could grapple better.
Yep.
And for me, I was a wrestler and grappler.
And it's in your head too.
But it was also, I got to be honest with you, I fucking hate MMA gloves. I do.
The construction, here's the deal. I wish I had one. Have you ever put a Bellator glove on?
Yes. They force.
It's form-fitting. Dean Lasser actually designed the glove. So you're actually hitting with the big knuckles. All the other gloves you're punching like that. That's one reason hand injuries.
And you have to force your hand closed.
And the other thing is it wouldn't let you open your fingers all the way, so we had less eye pokes. We had less broken hands and less eye pokes because of the design of the glove.
There was nothing more infuriating than when I would get into a fight and they would hand me a pair of gloves that had never been worn before.
Oh, I know.
And like the amateurs would be like, ooh, brand new gloves. And I'd be like, oh, you guys are fucking idiots.
Yes.
So I would literally have my coaches I would have one coach put one under his ass, like folded.
I
and then
tell
I'd have
them,
another
don't let
coach.
the inspectors see you. Turn away because they don't want you deforming the glove.
Really? Fuck that.
Well, in Missouri, you got to watch out, but do it on the sly. Anyway.
Allegedly.
Yeah,
No,
and they'll put it underneath the leg of a chair. And
I was just never a fan of MMA gloves the same way I was of like, I did amateur boxing as well. And the only issue I had with boxing gloves was the opposite issue that I had with MMA gloves, where there's
too much room
there's
in
too much padding.
That's why we make a big pad for
Yes,
boxing.
exactly.
Fill it up.
So like the MMA glove it felt so unnatural to put the MMA glove on that I thought sometimes I'm like, it might be even better to just like, if there was no glove, I would rather wrap them and then no gloves, just have wraps.
Yeah.
But then you get to like those bare knuckle, like I guess it's kind of close to that, but not, I don't know. I had never been a fan of the MMA glove.
Yeah, there's some really poor designs out there, and most of them, like I said, are punching like that, and that's why they hurt their hand.
Have you seen the new designs that the UFC has?
I have not.
So apparently they took a lot of inspiration from the Pride, and I don't think they said Bellator because they never say any of their competitors, but they said like, from previous promotions and current is like the verbiage they used, and it's actually very reminiscent or very close to like what the Bellator glove.
Oh yeah, that's the best design I've ever seen.
Yeah,
and I've seen hundreds of different brands of gloves, but when you get that form fitting in that right angle, and we had from small to 3XL.
It's kind of a two-pronged sword though, right? Because like as you improve the glove technology, you will then subsequently cause higher levels of CTE.
Well, so, some people say there's less damage done bare knuckle than with a glove.
Fuck no.
That's what just people
to the brain. I would agree with that because usually you're going to have less number of strikes. But in terms of the reason why I would never do bare knuckle is because of the lacerations. It's so easy to get cut.
Yep.
And no offense, I'm not trying to look like I was in a car accident by the time I was 40.
No, I know.
Because, my eyebrows have been stitched together so many times and my cheekbones have been just gashed. Like, no offense, I hate doing this. But, like, look at, like, a Nate or Nick Diaz.
No, I know. It's,
they step into the cage with a cut.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I like bare knuckle boxing. I think it's an amazing... I like that much better than I like slap. Let me put it to you that way.
I'm not into that at all. Bare knuckle boxing doesn't do much for me.
You don't like it?
No.
Why not? Don't you think it's like a better version of boxing?
I don't.
Why?
To me, it's a little bit sloppier.
Of course.
And the targets are different. I'm just an old kickboxing fan. The bare knuckle, I don't watch it enough and haven't seen a really good fight, so maybe that changed my opinion. But I haven't seen anything that really makes me.
I like boxing. My one critique of it is I think it's the same way. I want to be careful how I say this. I don't want to be disrespectful. I feel like the same way jiu-jitsu practitioners have kind of sportified jiu-jitsu with the competition and kind of have been slowly moving away from like the actual art, right? And getting more into competition. That's how I feel boxing has become. It's become more of the game of fighting with your hands than actually properly fighting with your hands. There's so much to discuss about, what kind of gloves you're going to use, when you're going to fight, the venue, and all these other things. It's very little to do with the actual fighting. Bare knuckle fighting, at least for me, makes me think like, if you can do that, you could do that at the bar, you could do that out and about. Like if someone actually
that's the real deal. That's
how to properly throw a punch,
and you're tough.
You're throwing 30 or 40 of them, and you're not breaking your hand.
Yep.
So
we had Kurt Lytle picked him up on our shuttle for one of our shows, and he had fought a week ago, and he was still black and blue, and his hands were huge.
Wow!
He didn't break them. It was just unbelievable how big they were.
Jesus Christ! And he was fighting for you guys the very next week.
No, he was coaching.
Oh, forgive me.
But he came in and we looked. I'm like, whoa, this guy's been. And he said, yeah, I did bare knuckle last week. He looked like it was from yesterday, but his hands were still really swollen.
It's really hard. This is going to sound kind of crazy to say because I don't think people understand how hard it is to like the increased surface area of a boxing glove actually helps you with some of the improper techniques you may have. Because it makes the actual like.
Well, if you hit with the little knuckles, it's not going to break your hand.
Not even that. I could completely miss you.
Yeah.
But because I have like an extra 2 inches of padding, that grazing shot
could
now
could break your eye. Who knows?
Yes, exactly. when you have the smaller the gloves get, and the only reason I say this is because I can see the difference between like sparring with boxing gloves, then sparring with the 8-ounce MMA gloves, then fighting with 4-ounce gloves. I was like, oh my God, this is just like the world of a difference. It's 16 ounce to 8 ounces, so half, and then from 8 ounces to 4 ounces, again, half.
Yeah.
I was thinking to myself, I really need to be locked in, or else I'm going to break my hand, or I can't just like throw willy-nilly. When you're sparring, whatever, I'm just going to throw some shit out there, and if it hits you in the forehead or whatever, what do I care?
Yeah.
Then with the 8-ounce gloves, I don't want to throw an uppercut directly on the chin because I might break my middle finger. I want to kind of hit it at an angle or something. I want to make sure I'm getting the soft spots of the face, not necessarily the forehead or like directly on the jaw. I want to hit like kind of the side of it. And then once I had the 4-ounce gloves, it was even more of that. I was like, I'm trying to hit you on the cheekbone, the eye. I'm trying to drive my knuckle into your eye socket because I want to basically like cause your orbital to break so that you can't fucking see.
Yep.
It became much more nuanced. So by logic, I would assume what you say is kind of wild, I'm sure, is the styles of fighting, but it's got to be even more intense with nothing on those knuckles.
Yeah.
So kudos to bare knuckle guys. I think it's amazing. Personally, I would never do it. And no offense to the slap guys. I know Colton Cole does slap. Just not my cup of tea. I don't.
Yeah.
I you know what slap made me realize? How much I value defense.
Sure.
Because when you allow for someone to not have any defense, it seems less competitive.
Yeah. And some guys, the way they're wired, you can hit them with a brick and they won't go out.
Or they have these necks and like, I mean, they could take a shot. It's just like a cheat code in that sport.
Yeah, if I did that, I would be hit.
Yeah, well, you can't. That's the thing. You can't.
I think they measure it up.
Yes,
where
you have to hit.
Because
Like,
the first thing I said is, I'm going to use my palm on that
yes,
guy.
do like a boss room,
Yeah,
like throw that thing back. And
so we
just
do in
basically throw
Kempo
a hook.
Karate. Yeah.
No, I think they thought about that and they said no way, Jose. Do you miss now? Because obviously Bellator is no more. You're not necessarily on the PFL bandwagon. Do you miss?
Yeah, I miss it a lot.
Yeah.
The guys, you know, being a cutman for Bellator is a dream come true. The only problem was the travel. You know, we
You didn't like it?
Well, no, I loved it, but it's the delays with the flights.
Oh.
You miss a flight, cancellation. I mean, we were doing, 15 to 20 shows a year, and sometimes you get delayed, have to fly. I flew out the same day, got to the venue an hour before the show started one time. I mean, it's just the flying part, and it drains you.
Where was the place that you went that you enjoyed the most, and where was the place that you went that you enjoyed the least?
Well, ironically, my very last, or the second to last Bellator show was in Dublin. I worked the main event. Johnny Eblin is my buddy from American Top Team, and wrapped his hands, and we won a belt together. He defended it, but he got cut in the second round bad.
Yeah, I saw that.
Bad.
Right above the eye.
And so he came back, and I knew he was bleeding, and I walked in, and I'm like, wow. So I do my deal, bing, bing.
Well, what do you think of when a fighter comes into the corner and they have, I mean, it's not a cut, that's a gash.
Yeah, no, I've had a lot of really big, bad cuts like that, but I've had a million of them. So I do my thing, and I tell Thiago Alves and Mo, he's got to win this round. He's got to go now. He's got to go now. And
Because the cut?
Because the cut, I go, I don't know what they're going to do, but so.
You were worried about the doctor possibly stopping the fight because of it.
Yes. And so he went out there and he stopped him. And the crazy thing was, Fabio Edwards, his brother, was this UFC champion, Leon Edwards. So when Johnny knocked him out, he torn him. Leon jumped in the cage, and I had to get in there. And they were ready to go.
Jesus Christ.
And the fight was over, and Johnny won. It was a big deal. And the doctor came over and shook my hand and said, "Great job on that cut, sir." He said, "If that was bleeding when the fight started, I was going to stop it." Now, I've got some special stuff.
Would you have taken, forgive me for this question, but would you have taken that as a slight upon you if, because this is a tough question to ask, right? Obviously, you're just the cut man. Like, you can only do so much in that minute.
Yes.
But had he not finished the fight and had that fight gotten stopped, because you're talking about the relationship you have with Johnny.
Yes.
Would you have felt a little personally, I don't want to say, like it was your fault, but would you have taken some?
No, I know what you're saying.
Some of the heat from
No,
that?
if you wrap a fighter's hand and he breaks his hand, you feel bad. You feel like it's not my fault, but it is kind of my fault a little bit. But I can't control. All I can do is stop that cut. Now, if you get a really experienced doctor, they know if it's good, it's good. We have doctors that really don't work a lot of fights, and they'll go in and they'll maybe a scalp cut that bleed bad, but it doesn't have anything to do with his ability to fight. They'll stop it. They never stop fight for scalp cuts. Never.
What do you think is an adequate cut to stop the fight?
It's the eye. Everything about the
Anything
eye.
that obscures the vision.
If your eye swells up, they'll stop it, but it's the tendons and nerves around your eye. So if you get a really bad cut over your eyelid or in the corner, and it affects the vision, that's when they'll stop it. But they'll always stop it if it swells up.
You mean permanently can affect the vision?
Permanently.
Past the fight.
Permanently.
I always thought it was anything to do, so like if there was a giant cut above the eye that caused a lot of bleeding, the doctors would stop it because they were worried that there would be so much blood over the eye that the fighter wouldn't be able to like adequately defend themselves. That's at the very
bottom of the list.
Got you. So it's actually more of like the permanent damage, which makes sense on its face.
Right. But I've got stuff, we use adrenaline or epi, it's by prescription. I have it made for me, it costs $300 a bottle. But I get
$300 or
$300 if you buy it from Walgreens like we used to. But now I have it made super cheap. But I have something, it's called epi grease. Most cutmen take epinephrine or adrenaline and put it in Vaseline, but it's oil and water and mix it up. I have it made in a pharmacy, compounded. So they use powdered epi in the grease. So when I'm putting the cut, it's actually working at the same time to fill the cut.
What does the adrenaline do? Forgive me.
It's a topical, it's a vascular restrictor. It stops bleeding. You know, you have a little cut on your nose shaving and it'll never stop. You put that epi on for 30 seconds, it'll never bleed again, ever.
Wow.
It's amazing the way it works. But you got to have pressure, got to have the right size swab. You really got to know how to work it.
Why is this not used in mass like at every fight then?
They do.
Oh, okay.
All cutmen use adrenaline or epi. You'll see their little
so this
bottle.
Isn't like a trade secret that you have.
No, that's what we use.
Got you.
It's really the only legal cut restrictor other than those pads that Stitch sells that has the stuff embedded in the gauze already.
Gotcha.
So, but it's and we have all size swabs. I make my own. I buy some, but everything depends on the cut.
We were talking about off the record on this, and I want to refrain from the individual, but let's say like a PFL comes up to you, or let's say a UFC comes up to you. Does the show matter to you, or are you basically doing this just out of a passion, out of like you just enjoy doing this line of work?
I always said when I was with Bellator, if UFC came calling, I'm loyal. I'm sticking with my family.
Okay.
Now that I'm out of a job for the big shows, sure, I'd go with them.
Yeah. Does Driesbach still work with?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Does he have any sway? Could he like talk to any of them, or is that basically
No. And see, Stitch Duran was their head cut guy for years. Then he got fired, and then he came work with us for a couple of years.
Well, he got fired because of the Reebok deal and the fact that like he was like, "Hey,
He said something, and it wasn't really anything bad. He just said that our sponsorship, we can't survive off our sponsorships as a living, but it's a nice little boost. It helps us. You know, it's a nice little side gig. And he just said, you know, I can't make enough money being a cut man, and Dana took it the wrong way and got rid of him.
I want to be careful how I ask this question because I don't want to know like the exact money that you made, but like, could someone live off of, let's say they're a Bellator cutman.
Yeah. Just
by being a Bellator cutman, can you garner enough revenue to sustain yourself on that?
No.
No, it's just not enough.
It's a great side gig though.
Yeah, it's got extra money potential.
Yeah.
But it's not main money.
And our travel is paid for, our rooms, meals, and I fly first class all the time because I had so many miles. It's great.
So you would buy them on your card and they would reimburse you?
No, they pay for our tickets.
But you would get the points?
Oh yeah, we get the points.
God bless.
Yeah, and
that's why they went out of business, brother.
The first time I
got too much first class.
Time I got bumped to first class, I go, God, I don't even tell anybody. Maybe they made a mistake. And I told him, oh man, you just got bumped up. I didn't know what it was.
Scott Coker's gonna listen to this and be like, oh my God.
No, what's crazy? We would go to small towns. And the whole jet was Bellator people, the entire jet.
Well, yeah, if you're
going and first class was all the executives because they had the most miles.
That's funny.
Yeah. But I had 250,000 miles at one point.
Jesus. I do the same thing for work. Like whenever I travel for work, that I basically buy the tickets on my card, and then like I'm reimbursed at a later time. And then whenever I have like any sort of like flight that I'm going to take for personal use, I basically just get it paid for myself.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a nice little cheat code.
Well, we were doing shows in Hawaii, and we were going to France. We were going to.
You like these places? These sound amazing.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Okay. But UFC didn't go to. We went to Paris every year. We went to Dublin every year. They went to Belfast. Some really cool spots.
What was a place that you hated going, or you enjoyed the least?
We did a couple of shows in Indiana in a casino, and it smelled like smoke everywhere you went. Everywhere you went, and it was just you couldn't get away from it, and it was just
disgusting.
This smell of cigarettes to me, I just can't handle that.
I had one boxing match that was at the Heart of St. Charles, and it was a smoker, and I didn't realize like what that really meant.
Yeah.
And I was like one of the last fights of that night.
Cloud of smoke in the ceiling.
Dude. So I'm walking out to the ring. I'm the second to last boxing match that night. And I remember seeing like this dark haze over the ring. And I'm like, that doesn't look good. Now the ring is elevated. Everybody's been smoking cigars for like the last
and the smoke rises.
Yes, and the smoke rises. I remember me and that guy went the distance. It was a split decision win. I barely won. It was a war. I could not breathe, Sid.
I believe it.
The next day, my lungs were like on fire for like 2 or 3 days.
Probably smoked 10 cigarettes.
Dude,
inhaling.
Oh my God. I remember after the very first round, I sat down and it was a 5-round, 2 minutes, 2 minutes each round, 5 rounds. That's what we fought. And I sat down after the first round and I go, either my cardio is shit or I'm not breathing air. Because I was exhausted.
Yeah.
Exhausted. And I almost knocked him out in the first round. And to this day, I'm like, fuck, man. I wish you would have just went down. Like, this was not good. And I told my coach, Reggie, at the time, I go, I love boxing. We'll do this again. Never doing a smoker.
Yeah.
Never. Go fuck yourself. Not worth it.
Yeah.
I have to ask, because I don't know this of you. I know that your martial art of choice, the one that you pursued, is karate. But did you ever also dabble in anything else like wrestling, jiu-jitsu, kickboxing, boxing, or anything like that?
The style, my style is called Chinese Kempo, and that's a traditional martial arts, a self-defense style. But I had 5 amateur boxing fights. I had 4 professional kickboxing fights, but no grappling.
Gotcha.
No grappling at all. I've been around it. I see it, and I know what works and what doesn't, but it's not my forte.
Interesting.
I'm a stand-up fighter.
Did it never interest you?
No, I like it a lot, but teaching karate full time and all the stuff I do, it's just I don't have the time for it.
You didn't have the bandwidth.
Now, MMA was never around when I started karate in '72, got my black belt in '77.
God damn.
Started.
Sid, I was born in '92.
Yeah, I know. I talk to these kids and stuff, and I say, when were you born? I said, I retired in '85. And they said, I wasn't born until '90 or whatever, But I fought in the '70s, '80s, and '90s, and it was all stand up.
How old were you when you started karate?
15 years old.
Okay, so not even necessarily like young.
No, not real young.
I know a lot of people that started a little bit younger than 15.
Yeah.
What was it about? Forgive me. Walk me through. You're a young Sid Gee. You're walking in and you're deciding to do karate. What is the thought process of why you even wanted to walk into a karate school? And did you ever think of doing like boxing instead or kickboxing? Like, why did you choose that karate class?
I was always a real competitive kid. I played basketball, football, baseball. I love sports. My dad played semi-pro baseball a long time ago. But my brother started doing karate before me. I've got 2 brothers and a sister. He was a year younger. And he really loved it. And I just never thought about karate. I was always playing basketball. That was my real passion. And I went and watched, and I go, man, I want to do that.
Okay.
And I saw him spar. I go, I want to do that. So I started taking karate there. I went every day. I was crazy about karate. It took me about 4 or 5 months to get the first belt, orange belt. And the head instructor came to me and said, you want to start teaching? I said, what? He said, you're really good. I'll give you beginners. You're a belt ahead. Start doing it as an orange belt.
So you started teaching as you were still
as a beginner after the first belt. Yep.
What would you be teaching back then? Just like the basics, essentially, like good stance.
A first-rate beginner walking in, inward block, reverse punch, front snap kick.
Gotcha.
And so teaching karate every day, you get so into it. It becomes part of you. I spar every day. I stretch. I never really trained because teaching was training for me.
Yeah.
And on Monday and Wednesday nights, we had sparring class for an hour. Everybody would fight. Then I would fight all my students one after another, all in a row after. I mean, I was in really good shape then.
Do you think that the act of teaching kind of forced you to look inward and really focus on the technique and maybe forego such an emphasis on the athleticism? Because as a teacher, you want to make sure that you're teaching them the proper foundation of whatever it is that they're doing, right?
Yes, but I was also a diehard karate student, so I trained hard every day. I mean, always working.
No, I'm not saying that you weren't in shape or anything like that. I guess what I'm trying to say is when you're teaching, I remember when I was just training, before I ever coached like my first class or anything like that, I never really thought about the nuance. It was always a means to an end. I was a good wrestler. I could throw a good overhand. I had enough stand up to like kind of survive. And then once Mop wanted me to start teaching some classes, I was like, oh, I need to really dial this back and really understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. Am I doing it because it works universally? Am I doing it because it works with my skill set? So like I wouldn't necessarily teach someone who has no wrestling some of the things that I do because it relies somewhat on my wrestling. So that's kind of my question for you. When you started teaching and not just being a student, I know that it was early, as it progressed, did it force you to kind of think, okay, why am I doing what I'm doing? How am I doing what I'm doing? Does it work universally? Or does it just work for me? Maybe because of my athleticism, maybe because of my height and my reach.
What's unique about our style, Chinese Kempo, most karate styles, they kick and punch. We were designed as a form of self-defense. Have you heard of Krav Maga?
Yeah. Israeli martial arts.
All their gun and knife moves are from my style. So we do multiple opponents, guns, knives. So if you grab me in a headlock, we have moves for everything. So I'm seeing kids getting picked on at school, getting bullied, and he learns a little bit of self-defense, goes back and punches that bully nose, kicks him in the groin. It changes his life.
Yeah.
It's life-changing. So not only am I in a business for martial arts, but personal development, confidence. And you develop confidence in somebody, how do you put a price tag on that?
Can I ask you a question? Why there's so many deviations in karate? So like whenever I look at jiu-jitsu, there's like the Chinese jiu-jitsu, there's Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I guess there's kind of like this subsect or offset of American jiu-jitsu that's kind of developing and really kind of growing now. But I mean, let's say you have three and one of them is very nascent. Whenever I talk to anybody that has done karate, there's always that precursor of like, I am Kempo Karate, I am this karate, I'm that karate. Where did that come from? Why so many deviations? It's almost like Christianity.
Well, there's literally hundreds of styles of martial arts. Hundreds.
Of martial arts or karate?
Well, you can call it whatever you want.
Gotcha.
Striking, kicking, punching. But in China, there's probably 50 different styles of Kung Fu. Praying Mantis, 7-star. So there's so many different styles. It's like models of cars. Your martial arts came from China, Japan, Okinawa, Korea. You've got your big car manufacturers, but each one makes 50 models. It's the same thing in martial arts.
Got you.
So
some
kick more.
Deviations of the main
like
thing.
Bruce Lee started with Wing Chun. It's Chinese box. It's all hands. There's no kicks. So everybody's different.
And then he would go on to introduce his own martial art.
Yeah, and everybody's different. So let's say you're in a style where you punch a lot. You may work on punching more than kicking. But in the end, you need all the weapons. You got to be able to kick, punch, knee, elbow, in self-defense, headbutt, all of it.
What do you think? This is kind of a loaded question because I know there's a bias in you, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What do you think is the most dominant martial art in isolation? So not like, oh, jiu-jitsu with wrestling or boxing with wrestling. In isolation, what's the most dominant martial art to
Okay. One of the things I did, I would say, was a avid karate competitor, a point karate fighter, and then I did kickboxing. But once you learn that timing and distance, if we do self-defense, I'm 10 times better because I can fade your kick, I can fade your punch, I can parry because I interact a lot. So when I do self-defense with that, you can't stop me. So Kempo, Krav Maga, some self-defense style with the movement and striking of a karate fighter with that super...
In isolation. You can't tie any of them together. Would you still say Kempo Karate? Would you say Krav Maga? Because that's the problem, right? I ask people this question all the time. Some people say jiu-jitsu. Some people say wrestling. Some people say boxing. They all have their answers for whatever reason. But for you, in isolation, so not Kempo with the timing of karate, which one?
Pure Chinese Kempo.
You think Chinese Kempo?
Yep.
Because of the timing, because of the range?
Because of the self-defense. I mean, let's say I'm in a situation with a 400-pound man, just a giant guy. I don't fear him, Aaron, because the second he moves, I'm going to poke him in the eyes and the fight's over. I'm going to poke him in the eyes. Not going to move so fast, he doesn't even know what's going to happen. So the point being, the major targets when you hit somebody in a fight are their eyes, throat, groin, and knee. Can't see, can't breathe, can't walk. I'm going to hit you such a way you've never been hit before, you won't be able to come back. It's that simple.
So end a fight before it starts kind
End
of
a
thing.
fight before it starts. I walk away from any fight. But I tell my students, if you're in a fight and you can't get out of it, you hit them first.
This is one of the things that jiu-jitsu guys kind of hate on me when I poo-poo a little bit on the martial art. I think it's a dominant martial art in certain situations, and I would say my answer to this question is actually like 85% of the time it's going to be jiu-jitsu. However, if you're at a bar,
If there's 10 guys, you're not going
and
on the
there's
ground.
not even 10 guys,
Stomp your
if
head.
there's more than one guy,
Right.
Because while you're working whatever, his buddy comes in and soccer kicks you in the head.
Right.
You know what I mean? I think whenever I talk about martial arts now, it's not necessarily competition, because I look at martial arts as like why it was started. It was started for self-defense,
Yes.
to be able to, I mean, it's in the word, right? It's the art of how to combat, martial art. It's not that I would disagree with you. I guess maybe I just need to educate myself more on karate. Or maybe it's my bias against karate because of the next part of this conversation where we're going to go. And it's kind of, in my opinion, happening to jiu-jitsu now. I think the most dominant is wrestling. But the caveat that I have with that is I don't think wrestling was ever a martial art to kind of finish a fight. It's really more to subdue. But also the caveat with that is one-on-one.
Yeah.
Because if there's another person, he's going to soccer kick you in the head.
Right. Yeah.
But that argument could also be made for like any martial art. Like, yeah.
It's really whatever you're good at too, you know?
Yeah.
But if you really learn self-defense, I mean, there's no high kicking. It's just pure take them out as fast as you can.
Do you think a lot of fighters today, more than any time, because I think training in martial arts has never been more popular, and I don't mean just jiu-jitsu or boxing. I'm talking about all of it, right? Do you think that'll, in a way, it's doing a disservice to people because it allows for someone to kind of have a false sense of reality of what actual combat looks like?
Here's what I tell people. You're better off doing it than not doing it.
Fair.
And when you start, you're nobody. But at one point, you put enough time into it, you're going to be better than you were than the first day you walked in the door. So there's some of these schools that don't teach self-defense. They think you kick somebody in the head. It's better to learn something than nothing.
I agree.
But how it's taught is so important. But you got to have something that's practical and makes sense.
So I'm just going to ask it. What happened to karate? There was a moment in time where
there was one on every corner. Karate school in every. Now there's a
very
jiu-jitsu school
prevalent.
in every corner.
Hollywood was behind
Yes.
it. There was a slew of movies. The tide was.
We had the Bruce Lee, the Kung Fu craze. And we had David Carradine, and we had Ninja Turtles. You had all kinds of stuff promoting it. But it's jiu-jitsu now. That's the new wave. And I think because of MMA.
But hold up though, guys. I will say this. I think there was a degradation or recession of karate before the ascension of jiu-jitsu.
My
Would you
business was
disagree?
always strong for a long, long time, and it's still strong. COVID hurt everybody.
But that's a little anecdotal, because what worked for you or what works for you might not necessarily work for everybody.
True.
Right?
But it just seemed like jiu-jitsu, karate did this and jiu-jitsu did that. It's just, I think it's the trend.
Yeah.
And it's in the movies now. You've seen kicking and punch, but you've always seen them doing the arm bar and the sweeps and
John
the
Wick,
throws.
actually, yeah.
So it's just the thing now. But like Helio Gracie designed jiu-jitsu so one man could beat a large man in a forest or wherever, one-on-one. And I mean, a guy like you can beat a huge guy if you choke him. And if you know how to do it, you can beat anybody. But like you said, it's not great for five guys, but it's great to defend yourself against one guy.
I would make the argument that there's no martial art that's great for five guys. Now, here's what I will say. You are absolutely correct when you say it's better to learn something than nothing. 100%.
Yes.
And I don't care what that martial art is. It could be boxing,
I
it could
agree.
be wrestling.
Even if it's not any good, at least you got an idea.
At the very least, you're used to some sort of combat,
Sure.
right? Versus nothing.
Interaction.
But that's kind of what I'm saying is like I worry if some of these martial arts and in the trainings, because let me put it this way. There was a lot of fighters that I met that when you put them in the cage and all that other stuff, they were great competitors, great athletes. But if you see them out and about, they're kind of meek and all these other things that they're not necessarily conducive to confrontation, for better and worse. I have a few friends that have never trained a day in their lives, but they're the motherfuckers that I want in my room, in the room with me if shit goes down, because they go 0 to 100 real quick.
Yep.
And in the presence of actual violence, where there are no rules, where you can't eye gouge, where you can't kick in the groin and bite, real combat is like ugly. It's not sexy.
Yes.
Like real combat's ugly.
Oh yeah.
I worry that maybe at least for those like 1-2 years in people, they'll get this false sense of reality of what they're capable of, maybe run their mouth a little bit, get chin checked.
You know, you get that in anything, but the majority of martial artists are pretty humble people, but there's always somebody better in the school. There's always somebody that's got your number. So
that'll keep you humble?
Yes, but the bottom line is, in martial arts, you learn to get hit, you learn to hit back. We want you to get hit in the groin, get the wind knocked out of you in a controlled environment. So when that happens in the street, it's nothing new. But people that have never been hit means people just fold. They just fold.
That's a great
big,
point.
tough guys. I always tell, even before I was into karate, my dad said, break his nose, see what he does then. You know, a lot of guys are tough. You break their nose, everybody's got an Achilles heel. Body shot, nose, whatever. Leg kick.
Do you think there are some martial arts that are better at teaching the toughness aspect? Because I think there's wisdom in what you're saying about being hit. I remember my first couple of sparring rounds and stuff like that, I did the thing that everybody does when they're first starting. Like, you know, you flinch, you're like,
turn
it's
your
like,
head.
Yeah, it's like human, I think it's a natural human reaction to like want to, you know, shy away from the impact.
Yes.
And it's actually a skill set. This is going to sound kind of stupid, but bear with me. It's a skill set to be able to face that impact, because then at least you're not, two things, you're not afraid of it so that you can meet it. And I always say the one that you don't see is the one that's going to sleep you. If I see something coming, I'm much more prepared both physically and mentally for that impact. So it's kind of like meeting something instead of like, you know, shying away from it. And then number two, once I've overcome the fear of being hit, that's no longer inhibiting me from the next move.
Yes.
Okay, yes, I'm going to get jabbed, but you're going to throw that jab, I'm going to throw my check 3. Like now I'm not just thinking only defense, I'm thinking defense and offense.
Yes.
So there's a wisdom to that. But what do you think in terms of martial arts is conducive to learning that? Are all martial arts conducive to learning that?
Yes.
I disagree.
But here's
I don't
the deal.
think jiu-jitsu is.
No. You're right. I'm talking about stand-up fighting.
Forgive me. I'm talking about all martial arts.
Right, but you got to learn to take a punch, and you got to learn to hit people. If there's schools that don't spar in karate, like how can you not spar?
That is weird.
They don't fight.
How do you test yourself?
They just do katas and stuff, and you know, in Kempo, orange, purple, blue, green, brown, 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 black. 7 steps to black belt. Well, orange and purple kicks, punches, techniques, katas. But for blue belt above, you got to do all that stuff and spar. You got to spar me. At the end of the test, we got nothing left. And I'll push you. I fight you tough, make you work, make it go. And so I promoted 299 black belts in my life. I got a couple of guys getting ready for 300. But they're all quality guys. If they get hit, they don't fall down and cry. They're tough people. So mental toughness is so important.
Can I ask you something about the belting system in karate? And this is not maybe isolated to just karate, but also taekwondo. The belting system makes sense to me for a multitude of reasons. 1, the physical representation of progression. 2, the physical representation of a skill set, right? Like the black belt is better than the white belt, so to speak. One of the things that always kind of jarred me or I thought was strange was the frequency in which belting happens in some of the stand-up martial arts versus some of the grappling ones.
Right. There's some taekwondo schools that have cheap fees, but they charge a lot of money for testing, and they do testing every 2 months.
I once dated a girl who told me she was a black belt in taekwondo at the age of 13. Now, maybe my judgment is skewed on this, but whenever I think black belt in any martial art, I think like you don't know everything, but you're a master.
High level.
You're the highest level by definition, right? The highest level.
Yes.
So when I think to myself, okay, is a 13-year-old at the highest level of this martial art? Does that physically, mentally make sense to me? No.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. I don't necessarily think that it's an arbitrary time commitment. There have been some black belts in jiu-jitsu in like 5-6 years, and they are world beaters.
Yes.
I think the outliers are always there, but there seems to be a consistency with the time frame it takes to get like from a white belt, blue belt, purple belt, brown belt, black belt, that is just longer than some of the striking martial arts.
Yeah.
Does that dilute the striking martial arts?
The problem is there's not a quality control among karate schools, and some schools give it away. We call them McDojos. They just give the belts away.
McDojos.
So here's the deal. There's 20 people in the class. You're the best guy in the class. I'm the worst guy in the class. We test in 2 months. Well, you might have been ready before, but they had to wait for the class. You had to wait for the whole class to get...
Can you...
and if I'm the worst guy in there...
Educate me real quick. When you say test... So like in jiu-jitsu, if your coach feels like you're at an adequate level, they can just give you a stripe. They can just give you a belt. Why do you guys test? Like, what is the test?
Okay. To get an orange belt from me, you have to learn 30 self-defense moves.
Okay.
2 forms or katas, and kicks and punches and combinations.
Okay.
So it takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months to master that. And all my students, I teach private. It's all private. So one-on-one. So once I feel you've mastered that and you feel we do a formal test, and you have to do that. You have to show us all this stuff in front of us.
Is there never a time where you just see it and you're like, hey, this guy's hit that level? Like,
No.
Okay.
We always make a formal test.
Okay.
We tell them.
Let me ask you this. Is the formal test, is there a cost to the
No,
formal test?
I do not do that.
Okay, you don't do that.
I don't do that, but
do
that's
some
where,
people do
right.
that.
And see, some of these taekwondo schools, they charge $500 to $1,000 for a black belt.
Dude, go fuck yourself.
It's crazy.
Go fuck yourself.
It's crazy.
Do they not see that that's going to
They don't care.
in the
They
death
don't
of
care.
their martial art?
They don't care. I've had students. I had a kid that was 9 years old as a black belt and came to me. He didn't know anything.
That's insane.
Yep. So there's a
It's
lot
also
of...
a stain on the martial art.
It does, but people that are into the martial arts know the good schools from the bad schools.
I don't know if that's true.
Here's the thing. Those schools that do that, they stay very sheltered. They don't let people go out and fight open tournaments, which I do and my students did. So they
You're
don't...
confident. You
they're
know
in the
they can-
they're in a little terrarium. They don't know what's out there. If they saw what's out there, they wouldn't think they're that great. So
sheltering the people, giving them a false sense of reality.
it's all about money.
When did that happen? And I hate to say it this way.
It's been around a long time.
Elaborate. Like, what do you mean it's been around a long time? Forgive me.
A lot of Koreans...
Was it around when you started?
Yes. Korea.
Okay.
What would happen is the Korean guy would come over and open a school, and they can't speak English. And so they make all the students learn everything in Korean. And that's part of the shtick still. But then he would bring his brothers and cousins over and teach and put them up, and they're kind of like slave labor. So they would just do that, and it was a money machine where these people would make black belts real fast. And it was just a big turnover. Where one of my students, it might take him 5 years to make black belt, where this guy made it in 2 years.
Does that make sense to you, though, objectively, that it could take some, like, okay, when you say my students take 5 years, is that the outlier or is that the norm?
No, that's just average.
So the average person can get a black belt in 5 years and they are a master of karate.
They're very good. Very good.
What is your level? Forgive me. Let's start with that.
I'm a 10th degree black belt.
10th degree.
I'm as high as you can go.
What is the difference between a black belt and like a first degree black belt?
Well, when you become black belt, you're
first degree.
It's
Forgive
called
me.
shodan. It's what we call it in the...
So from first degree to second, I'm trying to, because forgive me, if I sound ignorant, Sid,
No,
it's
it's
because I
okay.
am.
Sure.
I don't know karate.
Sure.
So like from first degree to second degree, I'm trying to understand, because I mean, even in jiu-jitsu, right? You have your black belt, and then you can still go on from there. You get like a white, 1 stripe, 2 stripe, what have you, a 6-time, whatever, a red, white. There's multiple extensions in
Yes.
jiu-jitsu past the black
Yes.
belt as well.
Yes.
Which sounds like this is something that karate has had.
Right.
Duly noted. I'm trying to understand that trajectory of, does it take 5 years to make a black belt, and that black belt is a master of karate? Am I correct in thinking that? Or are you saying that at a black belt level, you're high level, but not a master?
No. You're a master.
Okay, in 5 years, you can master karate, you think?
It depends on the person. Me, I trained every day, yes. If a guy comes in and wants to do it once a week, it might take him 10 years.
Duly
It
noted.
depends on the intensity.
But you said the average was 5 years,
The average, yes.
maybe for your people.
Yes, but some guys are faster. It may take some guys 8 or 9 years. It depends.
Gotcha.
Because here, my youngest student's 5, my oldest student's 82.
Okay, that's a delta.
So we
Jesus.
have all levels.
Well, here's the thing, and maybe this is my bias because I was more in the grappling arts first. 9 years makes more sense to me because I think to myself, like, I spent 4 years in high school wrestling, and I thought I was a pretty good wrestler. And then I went on to, like, wrestle some of these college guys, and I realized, oh my God, there's so much more levels. But they had been wrestling since they were like 8, 9, 10, right?
Yes.
So they had like 10 years on top of what I had. So even then, I thought to myself, this makes sense that they're better than me. They just been doing it twice as long as I
Right.
have. I never thought of myself as like a master of wrestling. Even today, I still don't think of myself as like a master of wrestling or any martial art, to be completely frank with you. That's my rub with some of this. I had Rodrigo Vaghi on because I don't want you to think that I'm kind of harping on this one specifically.
sure.
When I was talking to Rodrigo Vaghi, I was kind of reminiscing with him. I was kind of giving some of the same pushback and saying, like, because any belt can be awarded by a higher belt, you inevitably have a dissolution of norms or base, right? If I'm a blue belt, I can award you your blue belt. If I'm a black belt, I can award you up to your black belt. You have the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu now, where you can essentially get your blue belt securely online.
I've seen that.
Right? My problem with the belting is, am I incorrect in thinking that for the average person, not the outliers that we've discussed earlier, do you think that 10, 15, 20 years, is that outside of the realm of something that's feasible or right? Am I wrong in thinking it should take that long to get a black belt in any martial art, unless you're the physical specimen, you're the sponge, you're the 5-10% of people? I think 5 years is too low. I also think some guys doing 20 years in jiu-jitsu not having their black belt is too long. It's like, come on, guys.
Yeah.
But I also don't like the idea of targeting it by time, because we both know some guys that are sponges. They're gonna pick this shit up quick, and they're in 2 years and they're already subbing the purple belts.
Yeah, but here's the deal: at the black belt level, I don't care if you're a first degree or a 10th degree black belt, we all fight by weight. So it doesn't matter what rank you are. A black belt's black belt. The guys like me
in competition in karate.
Competition, but the guys like me that have been in a long time, the only way to differentiate me from anybody else is by my belt level.
You guys don't separate by age brackets?
No. Well, in fighting, it's like, I didn't fight. I fought competitively till I was like 35, but there's 40 division, 50-year-old and stuff. But I'm talking about the best of the best.
Forgive me, the actual competition.
Right.
Agreed. Okay. I was going to say, damn, dude, that's rough on the 50-year-olds.
Yeah, the best of the best.
Gotcha.
But belts don't mean anything in a fight. It's what you can do with it. But what makes me different is that if I trained you two or three times a week privately, you're going to learn better than if you went with a group class 3 times a week.
I agree.
So the training is specifically geared towards you, Arian.
So maybe the caveat to this is you're not doing because I will say this about all jiu-jitsu classes, right? It's not one-on-one. It's you are
Imagine if you took private lessons from Maurice Gracie for 5 years.
Yeah,
how
you're
good you
going to
would
be high level pretty fucking quick. I agree with that. So that's the caveat that maybe we need to add in terms of like a little bit of detail. That when you say that you're promoting people to black belt in 5 years, they're also exclusively doing privates with you. There's not necessarily the group class where you're like maybe overlooking some bad technique as you have to get to everybody.
Yeah, see, we do group for the workout part and spar. But as far as you learning the different material for the belts,
one-on-one.
It's one-on-one.
That's probably
and that way, I have to work harder, but I charge more money because it's all individual.
Do you think? I want to be careful how I ask this. The tough part about me when I look at the business of martial arts is because it's the one thing that I've kind of separated from business from my own personal life. Like anecdotally, I always looked at martial arts as like a sanctuary away from capitalism, right? It's like, hey, I'm leaving my job, I'm going to the gym. Oh, thank God I can unwind. However, any reasonable adult understands that this is an absolute juggernaut of an industry. Whether you consider it physical fitness, because you have some guys that are coming in for karate that might not even necessarily want to compete. They just want to come in and burn some calories. Whether you want someone to, push it to the highest level, they want to compete at the world stage. They want to make it as far as they can go. And then everything in between, right? How much of what you do now, and maybe this question could be like, when you first started, middle, and then now, how much of what you do and how you do it is based on the business of karate, the competition aspect of karate, and then your love of karate.
Yeah. I still teach karate because I love to teach karate. I could charge more money if I wanted, but I don't. I help people out once in a while that want to do martial arts that can't afford it. I have a real passion for helping people, making them better, especially kids and people that are getting beat up and need to find a way to fight back. But in the private lessons, you can make a lot more money, like I said, but you have to work harder.
Yeah.
So I never believed when I started karate that I could make a living teaching karate. When I started teaching, I was making like $2 or $3 an hour, and but I love to do it. And then later, when I went on my own, I'm making a good living doing something I love.
What a blessing.
I go to work in my pajamas, my karate outfit. I don't wear shoes. I sleep till 10 o'clock in the morning because I work till 10 o'clock at night. So my hours are totally different. But when I compete, I travel over the world. So there's a lot of opportunities for me. So, I mean, how could it get any better than that?
Fair. So are you saying that everything you do now has no... I want to be careful how I ask this question. If there was a pie chart of your decision-making algorithm, in that pie chart you have 3 pillars. One is the love of Kempo Karate. The other is the business. Obviously, this is a financial boom in your life.
Yes.
Like, how will this affect me? I can't pay the mortgage and all this if this goes under. And then also, for lack of a better term, the logistics of it. I mean, do you do, like, you do, when you were working for Bellator and being a cutman, obviously you would need to take some time away from that, right? So it's like, you can't also do one-on-one lessons and then fly out and go do a show, right? So it's like you're afforded some sort of work-life balance where you can do the additional things whenever you want them. For that pie chart, what does that look like for you?
Well, like I said, it's not about money for me. It's just about the passion for teaching martial arts. Does that make sense? I mean,
I'll tell you why it doesn't.
So there's a fine line. Okay, I know what you're saying. There's a fine line between...
Sid, you have to know your audience. I'm a greedy motherfucker, right? So like, to the normal person, yeah, that sounds great. To me, I'm like, motherfucker, you got to pay your rent. You got to pay your car. Like, I love that answer.
Yes.
But the real answer is not that answer. Now, the real answer could be 90-10. 90% love, 10% this is a way to make
Well, of course.
ends
I mean, I make a good living teaching karate. So
yes.
It's a business.
Yes.
Now, there's times when I have to draw a line like, is this guy going to do this? But the one thing I can say is I have integrity, and all my students are top notch. And I have certain requirements, and they have to be able to do that. Now, I have old guys that aren't as flexible and can't kick as well, but he can be as good as he can possibly be, and I'm going to make him that way.
You have not allowed for your integrity or morals to be tarnished by financial gain.
No.
Financial gain is a part of it,
yes.
Obviously.
Quality is more important to me than anything.
Gotcha.
Having quality martial arts, people say, that's one of Sid Gee's guys right there.
Do you think your peers in the space also think that way? Or do you think you may be the anomaly?
That's hard to say. I've been around longer than anybody. So I probably have more experience and more knowledge, but I think I'm highly respected in this community in martial arts.
Let me ask my question in a different way. The way you view your karate school, do you think other owners of karate schools, or actually this question could kind of expand past karate, do you think the way you tackle coaching is the norm? Are you the like outlier?
No, it's different because of the private lessons and stuff, but it just comes down to, it's hard to answer.
Well, luckily for us, we're on a podcast.
Yeah, right. You can edit that out, Adrian. That's hard to answer.
Let me ask you in a different way. The trend from when you started doing your own classes, your own privates, your own business to today, has the industry become better at recognizing quality over financial gain, or worse?
Worse.
Yes.
Because there's just a lot of junk out there.
In terms of all martial arts, or just
karate? Just in any business, you're going to have shysters that people do it for money, like contractors. There's great ones and there's shysters. And unfortunately, the karate business is the same way. These guys become a cult, and they take people's money. And if you see them, there's nothing. There's no substance.
Yeah.
I mean, if you learn self-defense and you go to grab somebody and they can't make it work, what's the point? So it all comes down to your ability. If you can't make it work, it's nothing.
That makes sense.
I mean, people don't know about real self-defense. I mean, I don't think you even know. Later, when we get through, I'll show you. You won't believe what I can do.
How do you know what I know?
Because I know you don't know what I know.
I trained under Jay D'Amato, and the very first thing I did
was
stick
a great
fighting
friend of mine.
and knife fighting.
California martial arts.
Before
And
he
Bruce
taught-
Albach.
Yes, before he taught me how to do a jab, he taught me how to parry and how to shift the weight from the lead leg so that if someone was stabbing me, I could at least parry and then get behind somebody.
Yeah.
That's what he taught me on day one. I thought I was coming in for an MMA practice. I got a self-defense practice. The only reason I say that, Sid, is because I only now, after the fact, Jay D'Amato, rest in peace, brother. I only know now after the fact how lucky I was to stumble upon a guy like Jay, who was a true, in my opinion, this is kind of what I was asking you beforehand, like with regards to like having fighters and stuff having a false sense of reality. Jay showed me that everything else that I was doing was sport. All the fights that I had in MMA was sport because we had the rule set and all that. Now, it's less of a sport than other forms of fighting because we had less rules, but we still had rules. And Jay was a constant reminder to me that, like, this is not pure combat. Pure combat is, like I said earlier, it's ugly, it's gritty,
Kicking,
it's
punching,
personal,
clawing, everything.
It's all the things that we don't look at as honorable. It's all of that. So the reason I say that is normally, Sid, you would be correct. And if you were sitting here in front of like 99% of the other fighters from St. Louis, you would be correct. I was just so happened to be lucky enough to run into Jay D'Amato. Because if I didn't, you would be correct, sir. I would not be an actual purveyor of true self-defense.
Yes.
So you're not incorrect in the assumption or the assertion, just on the I am the one caveat.
Yeah, Jay was an old timer like me.
Did you guys? You said
I
knew him from
I
back
know
in
him
the
real
day?
well. Sure, Bruce Albach. His remember? You ever know Bruce? He was the #1 kid.
No, when I got in there, it was like Elvin Spahic, Sanel Pilipovich, the guys like Dowdy and Aaron Brown and all them had just left with Steve Knogle to go do the Illinois side.
See,
so
he did.
I got in there kind of late.
He did some Kaju Kempo, some Hawaiian Kempo, and that's very similar to my style. We're Chinese, but very similar.
Yeah,
but he used to promote a tournament. I used to go down there and win his tournament all the time, and he was a good man.
Let me kind of pivot, if you don't mind. I want to get back onto this conversation about karate and jiu-jitsu and all that, but let me pivot for a small section. You've been in this game for so long.
Yeah.
And you've seen, in my opinion, like the 4 iterations of martial arts, or MMA, mixed martial arts, in the community. There was the guys like before Lance Benoist and Josh Sampo, so like the Mike Rogers, the Steve Bergers.
Yep.
Then there was the Tyron Woodleys, the Michael Chandlers.
Eric Irving.
Yes. Well, I would say Eric Irving. Yeah, Eric Irving and Josh Sampo, them. Then, in my opinion, there was like my generation.
Yes.
So like Josh was the generation before me, and then there was my generation. Now we're getting to the point where there's the next generation.
Another wave, yep.
You've seen 4, at least locally and abroad, because you've also been at the highest levels of the shows, and you've seen the best talent the world has to offer. What do you think about the transition of time in this medium? And that's a loaded question, so let's kind of take some time to unpack it. Let's start with one thing. Do you think the fighters of today are better than the fighters of yesteryear?
Yes. They're faster, they're stronger, they're smarter, the training is better. I mean, back then, you learned so much, but the athletes probably didn't lift weights a lot, probably didn't run, probably didn't do, they didn't do nutrition. Steve Berger didn't do nutrition. And it's not because he didn't want to.
Steve is like, yo, why are you throwing me under the bus?
They just, but we didn't know about that, So they've got so much stuff now. So, the hyperbaric chambers, and they got all this stuff that.
Dude, the science, I just had Matt Owen on here, and there was like a 10-minute span where he was telling me about the chemical makeup of muscle. And I was like, I thought I was intelligent about like, and I was like, Matt, for the last 7 minutes, the shit you just said over my head. I was like, brother, you're talking about all this other stuff. I know that if I sleep and eat good, I'll recover. But
like Berger and Mike Rogers, they fought in the old days, so they probably fought on, training on dirt floors, under a tent somewhere.
Mike told me that his very first show he fought at, or like he went to a show, the very first show he watched. Sorry, now he didn't fight because Steve Berger dragged him out there. It was like out in a field, and there was like dirt. Like the fighters were fighting, like walking on dirt and then stepping on the canvas. Yep. I'm just like, Jesus, that's how
we did shows downtown, outside on, it's crazy.
It's the Wild West.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I agree with you in the assertion that the fighters have never been better because I see it.
It's just
right?
Everything's better.
Yes.
Nutrition, training. I mean, stuff they're doing now is just stuff.
Well, they're also starting earlier. It used to be that the martial arts. Okay, when Mike Rogers and Steve Berger were coming up, you still had specialists. Like you had the karate guy, the boxer, the wrestler, the jiu-jitsu guy. And in a lot of ways, you were just kind of competing against the martial arts and also the individuals, right? Because like if you have a world-class karate guy or a kickboxer against a subpar wrestler, he's going to get knocked out. You know what I mean? Then the Josh Sampo and the Lance Benoist generation, you started seeing people start putting it together.
Yeah.
Little bits of this, little bits of that. But still in a lot of ways, you would have like, the boxer that learned some wrestling or the karate guy that learned some jiu-jitsu.
Right.
Not a whole lot of homogenization. I like to think that my generation was the first generation that started to perform the complete athletes.
I call them Tiger Woods.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
You're Tiger Woods.
But the common denominator of all of us was that we still had that like isolated martial art that allowed us to get into mixed martial arts. So for me, it was wrestling, and then I learned boxing, jiu-jitsu, a lot of other, I did a little bit of karate and taekwondo, but not as much as I would have liked. Now, this generation that's coming up, they're not doing karate. They're not doing wrestling. They're not doing jiu-jitsu. They're doing mixed martial arts.
Yeah.
Their very first class is the MMA amateur hour.
Yeah.
And they're learning how to sprawl on a takedown, to get a rear, to take the back, to get a rear naked choke. They're learning how to parry.
Well, why are the Dagestanis so good? Because they've got Sambo that kicks, punches, and grapples.
It's combined so many of
right, and they're
arts.
doing that when they're 5, where you're doing wrestling, and then you got to go learn jiu-jitsu, and
completely different stance.
So they got a little.
Thing.
They're up on us a little bit because they're getting it earlier.
I don't necessarily know if I agree with that. I think it's a direct reflection of the finances of it. Sean Strickland, I think he's a meathead, but he has some good quotes. Yes, one of the things he said that I absolutely agree with is if the UFC started paying money like the NFL, MLB, NHL, every champion in the UFC would be American, and I agree with him 100%. The problem is the finances. So in the UFC, when you get signed, spoiler warning, your entry-level contract is like $12,000 a show, $12,000 to win. For an American, unless you live in the Rust Belt, that's dog shit.
Yeah.
But for a Dagestani or a Brazilian or someone in the Czech Congo,
huge money.
That's an annual salary.
Yeah.
So these guys, even at the lowest level of the UFC, which by the way is the highest level, it's the 1% of the 1%, right? So I'm not trying to dog this in any way. They can fight in the UFC 12-12 on the prelim, lose, and still make a year's salary in wherever they live.
Yeah.
Versus an American, dude, you need to do 3 other side hustles just to make ends meet.
Yes.
So I think when you say something like, the Dagestanis have a leg up, I think they have a leg up for a lot of reasons. I think you're correct with the upbringing, the culture, starting with the Sambo martial art, which already combines a lot of martial arts. But I think the factor that is the most prevalent and will always be the most prevalent is finances. It's economics.
Yeah. And they're hungry, Well,
why are they hungry?
When you come from the
mountains,
mountain desert area, you got goat, you're hungry.
Yeah. So I agree to an extent. We talked a little bit about this off the record, and I don't know what it is that you would like to share. We were talking about the trajectory of time and how that regarded the regulation. So full disclosure, I had Tim Lukanoff on the podcast, and we talked about, his extent, because he's been doing it for 30. He literally told me that he's been doing it for 32 years, and at the time, I was 31. He was literally he was the head of the State Athletic Commission for
Well, he was also the president of ABC Boxing for many, many years, which means he was the head honcho of all the combat sports in the United States.
Yeah, correct. Didn't even know that you knew that.
Yeah.
Thank you. You're doing a better job of discussing Tim than I am. I could see that with Tim. This was the same way I look at you and I see the lifelong passion of the craft that you chose. I look at Tim and I see the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? When you
Sure.
spend 30 years in something,
yes.
Yeah, I'm sure he makes a cushy salary and all this other stuff, but it's also because he loves this thing, right? Or he feels some sort of affinity towards it. And specifically, he was talking about like his successor and how he really wants to make sure that whoever it is that he picks and grooms and everything is truly ready for the booth, so to speak.
It's a grind.
Yes.
Every weekend.
Yes. Trust me. He was telling me, and it's like, I don't know how his wife, God bless that woman. However, you made a comment that I, full disclosure, I also agreed with, where we were discussing, the previous generations of MMA and how things were when I was coming up as an amateur and how they were just fundamentally different from today. And a lot of that had to do with the State Athletic Commission coming in and starting to sanction the fights on the amateur side as well. Before the State Athletic Commission, there were subsequent individual parties that would act as sanctioning bodies. BMF was one, Spire was another. So just in our local community, we had two, and they were direct competitors, and I love competition and capitalism. Why are you laughing, girl? My question for you was, why did you say what you said? Why did you think that the game, at least at the amateur level and prior years, was better before the State Athletic Commission got involved?
Well, like we talked about before, blood work. Most of these organizations required blood work for amateurs.
I disagree.
And the state?
I disagree.
State doesn't, right?
I never did. Holy shit, this is where my CTE might come involved. I never did blood work until really late into my amateur career. I never did blood work. I want to be careful how I say
and
this.
When you fought Fight Me, did they require it back then?
No, Fight Hard never did anything.
Now, was that?
What's up?
Yeah, because Shamrock did.
No, they didn't.
For me, they did.
When did you fight for Shamrock? What year?
Your last couple of fights.
Yeah, that's way later. I'm talking about,
so
full disclosure, when I started, it was in 2011. I was right out of high school, and I graduated in 2011. So I'm 18, 19 years old. My very first fight, I believe I was like in 2012 or 2013. So I was like just 20 years old. I had not had to do blood work for any commission, for any promotion until I went pro. There was a person that I was supposed to fight at the amateur level that we had tried to make things work. He was really high ranked. I was the up and coming guy. Everyone was trying to put us together, and I was for it. So was he. But for whatever reason, the politics at the time never allowed for it. He tried to make a professional debut and realized that he had hepatitis C.
Wow.
So as an amateur, this is why I'm saying what I'm saying. As an amateur, I know for a fact that the majority of the people were not they didn't do blood work. And I felt bad for this guy because he had no idea. Had they required it of amateurs, he would have caught it earlier.
Yes.
Maybe would have had a professional career, what have you. I don't know. You know what I mean? But to put that into perspective, when you say that before the state that they were doing blood work, I can tell you for a fact, Sid, that is just not the case.
Well, are you sure all the organizations didn't require it? Because I thought Spire did.
I fought for Jim Jenkins, who was with BMF.
Yeah.
And I fought for Fight Hard, who I believe was Spire. Were they not? Was Spire not with Fight Hard? Forgive me, this is like going back.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
By the way, if someone knows this, please put it in the comments. I would love to know. I don't know. I know that BMF for Jim Jenkins. I don't know who was the sanctioning body for Spire. So to that extent. But no, my amateur career, I fought for 3 promotions, okay? The first 6 fights were all under Jim Jenkins. The next 2 or 3 were with Kenny Nowling and Fight Hard. But then that's when I also bumped up to 145 to fight Cortavius in my one fight that I had with Shamrock. For all 3 of them, I never needed blood work.
Yeah, and I mean, it's as bloody as it gets in MMA. So who wants to fight somebody you don't know what's going on?
I find 2 things can be right at the same time. I think that amateurs should need blood work, just the same as pros. And I also think that if the promotion is not going to pay the amateurs, the least they can do is offset all of the costs for competition. So, like, you don't necessarily have to pay for the physical, right? Because the promotion takes care of that.
Or blood work or whatever.
No, you have to pay for blood work.
No, I'm saying, yeah, it's all part of it.
When you say it's all part of it, elaborate.
The physical out-of-pocket costs.
So the physical out-of-pocket cost is taken care of by the promotion because it's the extension of the state. But every time I did blood work, I had to pay for it.
You see, at Bellator, you would not believe the testing they required. Eye test, blood test, heart test, brain,
and
everything.
And they wouldn't make any of the fighters pay for that.
No, they took care of all of it.
That's my thing. I think you need both. It's such a tall order now to ask an amateur, hey, do the camp, make the weight, sell the tickets. You can't get a fucking dime.
Yeah.
Also, in order to fight, you have to pay this, that, or the other just to get the pass.
Yeah, no,
so
I
that
agree.
You can actually compete.
Why can't you offset their costs?
You should be able to. In fact, I would say that should be a part of. Tim's not going to like me saying this. What is the point of having a state athletic commission if not that? Like, Tim was talking to me and he said that essentially the coffers at any given time for the state athletic commission was around $855,000. It was essentially, the calculation was 2.5x of their annual budget. So like if they had any dollar above a certain threshold, then that would go to the state coffers. And my original question for Tim was like, why? Why would you ever get to a point where you need to be $855,000 in the bank? If I ever had a friend, let's say you and I are talking and you tell me, Ariane, I got $855,000 in the bank. I would call you an idiot today. Like, why aren't you making that money work for you? Why aren't you doing something with it? I would say the same thing about the state. It's like you have $855,000, you have 2.5 years of budget if you do nothing. If there's another COVID, let's say. Why?
Yeah.
Why the fuck is some amateur who's not getting paid paying $60, $80, $100 for their blood work? There's some things that I would like to see changed in this game. Unfortunately, to change anything, and this is why I agreed with what you said about the state getting involved with the amateurs. I think that the state getting involved at a certain level makes absolute sense, and I do like that the state, I like the umbrella that the state brings in terms of like uniform safety, because if you had individual sanctioning bodies, the rules become different.
Yes.
You don't necessarily get mandatory blood work even if the state's not involved, right? However, then the onus starts to be asked of like, okay, well, what's under the purview of the state sanctioning body? What's under the purview of the promotion? What's under the purview of the fighter? As far as I'm concerned, the fighter's doing, like I said, they're selling the tickets, they're cutting the weight, they're making sure they show up, they're being professional, all those other things, and then they're performing. What's the promotion doing? They're taking on the financial burden, they're handling all the logistics, they're putting everything together, they're paying the fighters, right? Well, what's the state doing? The state is there, as far as I know, to uphold the rule set. They bring the judges, the timekeeper, things like that. They handle some of the logistics, and they make sure that like a certain level,
it's consistent
of coverage on
Yeah.
like health insurance and all these other things. Outside of that, I think it's okay to ask the state athletic commission for a little bit more. And I think making certain things mandatory is fine if then you subsequently subsidize that
Yeah.
thing that you're making required.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you're telling me like, okay, well, if the state has to cover it, then we got to charge the promotions more. Okay.
But don't some of these promoters give the guys money back from ticket sales?
No,
I thought that was
not amateurs.
I thought that was the
They
deal.
were.
Oh,
They were.
because then that would make
But that's apparently not that. But hold up though. Is it the same thing to say that you getting commission as a salesman for the product you're selling is equivalent to the expenses of the act that you're doing? As far as I'm considered, those things are two completely different things. If I sell a $50 ticket and I get 10% commission, give me my fucking $5.
Yeah.
And then that blood work that you're requiring of me, you pay that shit.
Yeah.
Or get a physician, get some sort of connection to like offset the thing because of economies of scale.
See, I do shows out at State in Illinois and Indiana, and the promoter in Indiana, they
all make it
they
mandatory
give
for
them,
amateur
they
and
give
pro?
them rooms, and they get a percentage of the ticket sales. Amateurs.
Even amateurs?
Amateurs.
I know that you can give someone lodging and transportation and all that, but even then, the language on the state is like no more than like $100.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, how do you get a hotel? Like any hotel now, even like the shitty hotels are more than $100. It's a classic case of the legislation is hard to change because of bureaucracy.
Yep.
And time changes faster than bureaucracy. I want to be careful how I say this. I think Tim and all of them do a job. I think they do a good job for what it is they do. Do I think that their role should be expanded? Honestly, no. My political leanings are more conservative. I like smaller government. I think the onus should be on the promotion more than anything. This should be a cost of doing business. Calculate that into your pro forma, your statement of cash flow, what have you. I don't think it should be on the amateurs.
See, what's different is like
Or the pros.
there's some
Or the
states
pros.
that don't have a commission.
How do they run?
It's just Wild West. I mean, so that's the deal. I mean, I've worked so many states, and I will tell you, Missouri is one of the best commissions that there is. Kansas is very good.
What makes Missouri a good one to you? Like, what's the metric that you say?
The inspectors are very courteous and very polite.
To you?
To the cutman, yeah.
Okay.
Obviously, since we know each other, we just do what we want to do. They don't have to sit there and actually watch you do it because they know we do a good job. But they're fair.
Can I say something?
Sure.
If I'm paying if I'm paying the state athletic commission $10,000 to $15,000 as a promoter, yeah, Sid, I'm sorry, I want them to fucking watch what you're doing. The fuck am I paying them for? I understand what you're saying.
Well, they sit there. They're here, but they know now. If
by the way, I'm gonna get a lot of flack for this because I know Jerry and all these other guys. Yeah. I love you all. Do not get this twisted. We are talking high level.
Right. And see, there's some commission where, like, you go to New York, they want to bully you. They want to tell you how to do it.
Well,
where we know.
Well, that's because they got things like Madison Square Garden. They're like,
well, we've done our shows there twice, but I'm telling you, it's just they are brand new in the MMA. You know, they were the last state.
Yeah, because of the
there was a guy that got in the way.
The culinary union out of everybody.
A guy got in the way. So they'll try to bully you and tell you, they try to tell us what to do when we know what to do, and they don't.
Yeah, too much.
The perfect example, Arian, is when a guy is cut between rounds. We go in and fix it. The doctor can call time after we've done, and that's what a good doctor would do. But poor doctors will come up, pull our hand away, look at it while we're trying to get our 40 seconds in.
I get a minute. Let me work.
Right, and then I'll say, sir, you can look when I'm done. But normally we talk to the doctor beforehand, get them on the same page that, will you give me my minute when we're up there and not pull the hand away and look?
You know what I will say? I think that Macklin and Munchie are two really good.
I'm telling you, I've worked with hundreds, and they're two of the best.
Yeah.
And they let us do our job. They know what to do. You know, Melvin sews those guys up when they're done.
Yeah.
I tell the guys that's a $10,000 sew-up job.
And here's the thing.
I'm a plastic surgeon.
Yes. That's what I was going to say. He's not doing a suture on the skin level. He's going inside and actually stitching the tissue up so that you won't get necessarily
He did Dowdy's eye, and you don't even see a scar on his eye anymore.
No.
Every time I see him, I go, where's that cut at?
Yeah. I will say that also, I got stitches after the Cortavius. I want to be careful how I say this. I'm not going to say the doctor's name. There was a doctor before Junaid Munchie that did my stitches after the Cortavius fight. He did the stitches so bad. Sid, so bad.
I had a guy get sewed up.
Shout out to Kelly D'Angelo, because also I couldn't get a hold of him to get the stitches out. So I was like, hey, I was like 22 years old, 23 years old. I've never gotten stitches before on my face. So Kelly, thank you so much. She was like, hey, come over. I'll take them off for you. Because she was at the time, she was a firefighter, EMT. Like, she did stitches before. She could easily do it. She was taking the stitches out. She's like, who the fuck did this? I go, what do you mean? And she's like, this is awful. I go, what's awful about my stitches? She's like, well, for starters,
probably too wide.
No, one of them didn't even hit the. So let me illustrate this for you. There is a cut. So you have like section A and section B. You need to put the needle and the thread under both sections to bring the skin together so that the skin and the tissue kind of like heal themselves. That's the whole thing about stitches.
They got to touch.
He went into the cut, and I remember this because I remember thinking, I'm like, damn, this fucking stitch hurts. You know what I mean? And he gave me the numbing ointment, and it still hurt like a motherfucker.
That's crazy.
And Kelly's like, he missed this.
Oh, man.
Whoever did this is an idiot. Fast forward after my Bashi fight, Junaid Munchie was like, hey, I need to go to my car to get like the anesthesia. We just don't have it on us. I'll stitch you up. I go, fuck that shit. I was kind of like at a low point. I was like, I deserve this pain. Just stitch me up right there and then. I received less pain from Junaid doing my stitches with no anesthesia than I did from the previous doctor with anesthesia. Yes. And I had, by the way, that doctor only had to do one cut. Junaid had to do like 4 because I had one here, one on my eye, and then I forget the other one. I think it was like behind the ear. And Junaid did all of it. Shout out to Junaid. He also came to my work, my place of work, 3 days later to remove the stitches.
Wow.
He's like, hey, do we have like a office we can use? So we went into one of the hoteling offices, and like I remember someone walked in. I go, hey, the look on their face, it's like, because I work in information systems, so they're like, what the fuck? There's a doctor taking out my stitches in our office building, and I'm like, hey, give me like 15 minutes. So thank you guys. To the point, we are very lucky to have some of the staff that we do.
Yes.
I agree, but I was wondering if maybe some of what you're saying is once again anecdotal bias because of how you are treated. You, Sid Gee, not necessarily the fighters, the promotions, yada, yada.
No, we have a really, really good commission here. And it's all about being professional. You want to be nice to people. Some of these commissions just try to bully and want to, like, why? You know, then Connecticut and Weekend Sun, where we did a ton of shows during COVID, we did 15 shows, 15 weeks in a row.
Wow.
And the Bellator people stayed there. Cutman, we'd fly back and forth, but they knew us, and they were so nice, and just great people. And Mike Mazzulli is the head commissioner of ABC now, Tim's old job, and that's his group. So they're top-notch bunch also. And we would do European shows. That commission would go over there and take care of those shows.
Was it similar structure in Europe in terms of how we do it in the States? Like with the
We
state
took our
athletic
commission
commissions?
over there. Connecticut commission went over there.
Does Europe not have their own commission?
No.
Okay, so they don't have their own commission.
No. Well, if they do, they're not quality to run a big show like Bellator.
So you would basically outsource the commission to the States.
It was all the same guys I worked
How
with.
does that work? I mean, does Europe just say
They fly them over there.
and say, okay,
They fly
do it on our behalf?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
interesting.
But it ran like clockwork because we all worked together in
Yeah,
Connecticut.
everybody understands
Yeah,
the system.
everybody knows everybody.
Yeah.
When I started with Bellator, I was so impressed with there's 500 guys and everybody's an ant. Everybody has their own job and everybody knows what to do and it runs like a clock.
That's what they say about the UFC. Every Bellator fighter, like Michael Chandler said that one of the interviewers was asking him like, what is the main difference from Bellator and the UFC? And this is why I'm curious to hear you say that. Michael Chandler said, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm not like doing a proper quote, but essentially he said something about how like the UFC compared to Bellator was such a well-oiled machine. That the UFC, because of the repetitions, because of the volume, is just on to the next, on to the next, on to the next. The conveyor belt of human CTE.
We do shows every week.
Yeah, that's fair.
So,
But I guess what I'm trying to say is, whatever you're saying about Bellator, imagine what it is in the UFC.
yeah. When there's that much money involved, any questions taken out, anything you even think about is taken care
Well,
of.
have you heard about the rumblings about why specifically they did the Apex and Fight Island and everything during COVID? Dana White likes to say that it was because of, he doesn't want to lay anybody off. He wants to make sure the fighters have all this, that, or the other. The rumor mill says, I don't know if this is true, but just, for argument's sake, they had just signed that ESPN deal. And ESPN is owned by who? Disney, parent company. The linings of the deal said that the UFC would do a certain number of shows a year in order to get that whatever hundreds of millions of dollars. So when COVID happened, apparently there was a meeting saying like, what are we going to do, this, that, or the other? And Disney basically said, if you don't do these fucking shows, we're not paying you this fucking money. Here's the contract.
Yeah.
Suck our cocks.
No, those were great shows.
And Dana, to their credit, made it happen. The only reason I bring this up is there's like this kind of mystique around how the UFC like was the premier organization that made things happen. The NHL, the NFL, the MLB were kind of like sidelined for a lot longer than the UFC were. The difference was the incentive. They didn't have the contract that the UFC had. So it's like the UFC had to do that or they didn't get paid. Where these other organizations were still getting paid.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe the stuff we had to go through. We had to take 3 COVID tests in a week to go. We had to take one before we went.
Jesus.
We had to take when we got there. So we actually had to be quarantined in our rooms for like a day.
I know the show that they did in St. Louis. I remember how much of a clusterfuck that was for the fighters because like even the local guys that were fighting on it had to go to the hotels and quarantine, and everybody was like, "What the fuck? Like we live here."
Well, we would fly together, me and Craig, but then they were sending individual cars to pick us up at the airport, which is an hour and a half drive to Weekend Sun for each fighter. And they had these saunas that they were giving fighters to use in the room.
I like that
individually.
Hold up though, there are some things that I do like about that.
That's a lot
I
of
do think
money.
that every fighter should get their own room. I do think they should have their own personal sauna. Like there are some things that do make sense to me, but then it's like your cutmen arrive on the same plane,
Yes.
get into separate cars.
Right.
Shut the fuck up.
Yes, yeah.
COVID will always go down to me as the most. I never thought I would ever see such malpractice with logic ever in my life. And in a lot of ways, I was already kind of right of center before that. So I was a little bit like less government. I don't really want, this, that, or the other, more libertarian than anything. COVID radicalized me, Sid. COVID radicalized me. It proved to me that my government will lie to me whenever they can.
Yep.
It proved to me that they do not know what the fuck they're doing. It proved to me that in some ways they could be the cause of what it is we're going through.
Agree.
And all of these other things, and that, you know, the UFC, Bellator, they're just like in one industry, but everybody else was trying to do certain things in their own respective industries. It was crazy to me that in my lifetime I could see the subversion of my rights and liberties under the guise of mass health
Well,
hysteria.
how about they had people ratting other people out if they weren't?
That's communism.
I mean, that's unbelievable.
That's communism.
Yes.
My dad used to tell me, because I would ask him, I'm like, because we came from, for those that don't know, I'm a first generation immigrant from Albania. And my dad, when we landed in the US, my dad got off the plane and kissed the ground because he's like, America. And I remember my dad would tell me stories when I was little, and he'd say things like, I would ask him, I would be like, how do you get communist? My dad would tell me, he's like, they promise you things at first because your life is hard. So they promise you that they'll take care of this. They promise that they'll take care of that. And that they're going to tax somebody else. There's someone with more, and we're going to take some of what they have and we'll give it to you and we'll take care of you. When in reality, what it is a power struggle between industry and bureaucrats. And then what happens is once the bureaucrats get the power, they can maintain it through laws, which is something that industry will never have. So they already have a leg up in power. Once you have that, it's a slippery slope. And then you get the shit where it's like people are ratting out. My dad told me a story about how when I was little, my mom had problems with nursing me. She just wasn't producing enough milk. And there was a gentleman down the street who had an illegal cow in their basement. Because it was illegal in the country of Albania to own a cow.
Wow.
Every piece of livestock was owned by the government.
Wow.
It's the government's cow. So my dad would have to go and like basically barter with this guy to get some raw milk to feed me as a baby, as an infant, because my mom wasn't producing enough milk. And my dad told me that like he had to warm up to the guy for like 2 or 3 weeks to make sure that my dad was like genuinely like, dude, my child is not eating enough. Because they were worried that like my dad would come in there, see the cow, and then rat him out. Because at the time, if you would have ratted someone out, the government would like, you get extra bread this month. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Literally no different than what we were doing in COVID with like the masks and the fucking social and all this other stupid bullshit. I don't belate people or I don't fault people for being scared. And
It was unknown. Nobody knew.
for the first 2 weeks to a month, I'll give you credit. After that, 6 months after, if you are still spewing some of this dumb shit, you're the idiot. Yeah. You're a fucking moron. If you are still in the year of our Lord 2025 spewing some of this dumb shit, you're beyond saving.
How about people in restaurants with a mask pulling it down, eating, and put it back on? Are you kidding me?
We went to Olive and Oak for someone's birthday dinner. They allowed us to have 11 people in a room, but any time, so 11 people in a room, and we were talking, we could have our masks down. Anytime a service worker would come in to pour you water or give you some food or whatever, everyone in the room would have to put their mask up. And I remember going to my wife and I go, I don't know what we're paying for this dinner. I want to walk out immediately. It was the worst dinner, the most ass backwards logic I've ever seen in my fucking life. Lo and behold, the owner of that restaurant was incredibly liberal. The staff was incredibly liberal. It's not that I dislike liberals. It's I dislike their logic because there is none.
I was going to say
There
that
is
exactly.
It's an oxymoronic statement to me to tell me that you're a liberal and intelligent. You can't be both. Because to be liberal is to there's an absence of critical thinking. You don't ask why. You're telling me this thing. Why? Who? What credential do they have? Where did they get that knowledge? If you're not asking questions, then what are you? You're an NPC.
Yeah, well, you're sheep.
I'm not saying that conservatives are better, because I've seen some fucking podunk hillbillies, meth heroin addicts, fucking Trumpers. They're like, that's my president. All right, brother, you have fun. There's extremes on both sides. What I am trying to say is I seem to have more in common with right of center people or conservative people than I do liberals. Yep. Like, I don't think there is, outside of Jordan Dowdy and like a few others, I don't think you can call yourself left of center. I don't think you can. I don't think there is a left of center. Or at the very least, that margin is so fucking small where the Overton window has been shifted so hard in the last 4 or 5 years that politics as we know it is just so polarized.
Yeah.
And it's fine for one side to call you Hitler, but if you want to do anything, it's like you have to go through this, that, or the other bureaucratic process. Go fuck yourself. I don't want to hear this shit anymore. I'm a 32-year-old man, and all I know from American policy is we like to bomb people in the Middle East. We don't know what the fuck we're doing with our tax dollars. We can't seem to do any sort of internal help in any way that's meaningful or proper. And our government is just it's so infantile in its ability to fuck shit up. I look at my government like I look at a child, like my child. If I leave her alone for too long unsupervised, she'll hurt herself.
I agree.
I shouldn't feel this way, Sid.
I agree.
I shouldn't feel this way. Anyway, karate, right? You were talking about earlier how COVID really hurt your business. I'm interested in if you elaborate on that a little bit. Did it hurt it because of the social distancing and all this stuff?
It was a number of things. What really was bad is that Sam Page shut down St. Louis County, but
Shout out Sam
St.
Page.
Charles County was wide open.
Mm-hmm.
So you got the guys at St. Charles MMA grappling and wrestling 1 inch apart, where I couldn't teach a guy standing 5 feet in front of me. And, you know, I'm old school and old timer, and I should have done some kind of Zoom type thing, but I just wasn't into it at that point.
How do you do Zoom?
Well,
for
if
martial arts,
it's a one-on-one private lesson, so he's looking at me and I'm looking at him. I mean, it was better than nothing.
fair.
But
Fair.
I was able to get PPE out of, for a couple of years, so it didn't bring me whole, but it helped. I didn't have to go to my savings or anything. But it just got to and I could see if you have 50 people in a room, doing karate, but one-on-one, it's a big deal. And then a lot of people
You should have at least been able to do it 6 feet apart.
Yeah, and a lot of people
Let me show you the technique.
A lot of people lost their jobs.
Dude.
A lot of people got, just things happened. It just stirred it up.
Can I say something about that? I'm curious to see what you hear or what you think about this. I actually don't believe that COVID was the economic disaster for everybody that everybody says it was. I can tell you for myself.
Some people made money in that.
I can tell you for myself, Sid, my quality of life, my earning 4x'd in those year and 8 months. Directly because of the luxuries that were afforded to me because of remote work and everything. For the first time in my life, I was able to also work on my side things while I was working with my main job. And it just changed the trajectory of my life forever.
Well, now they're trying to get people to come back to work. They were out forever, but they got lazy.
Well, I'll tell you this. Good luck. Good luck. If you have no leverage, if your skill set is menial, if you are easily replaced, then shut the fuck up and go back to the office.
Yep.
If you're not, then don't shut the fuck up. Don't go back to the office.
No, I can see advantages either way, but in the long run, if they say come back, you got to come back.
Or you leave.
Yeah.
And you work for someone who doesn't.
Yeah.
Because that's the beauty of capitalism. That's the beauty of the open market. That's the beauty of competition.
Yes.
You want me to come to the office. I don't want to do that. So I'll work for someone who doesn't. And then you'll let the market dictate.
Well, everybody doesn't have that luxury, but.
Well, if you work for the government, you don't deserve that luxury. I'm sorry. When my tax dollars fund your money, you do whatever the fuck we want you to do.
I agree.
And if my I voted for Trump. If Trump says get back to the office, sorry. Get back in the office.
I agree.
Now, if you don't want to work for the government, by all means, leave. Go into the private sector and see what that's like.
Mm-hmm.
Enjoy. It's very competitive. And if you're good at what you do, if you're smart, if you're capable, if you're all these things, you'll flourish.
Yeah.
And if you're not, you'll go back to the government. I know very few people that work for the government exclusively that I would say could actually make it outside of that, like maybe 5 or 6 people. Shout out you. Everybody else that works with the government works through their own entities as a private contractor. They have their own separate business, an NGO, right? Non-government official, or not NGOs, but like maybe government contractors is a better way to describe them. And they flourish. They could do whatever it is that they want to do in any other aspect of life. They chose to do this. I don't think the government should be the main employer of U.S. citizens, because right now it is. The biggest employer of Americans is our U.S. government. Federal, not even state, just federal. That's insane. That's insane.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Yeah. And they say if you're a federal employee, it's hard to get fired.
Well, of course it is.
I mean, it's just like, it's a good old boys club.
I don't necessarily, can I be honest with you? I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. If you spent 20 years at a place, I do think that there should be some like seniority and some tenure and some things. Like you dedicated a lot of your time, effort, and willpower into this thing.
I agree with that, but sometimes you get these slackers that just coast.
I agree with that as well.
They just coast.
Yeah, but here's what I'm going to say about that. If you walk into any company with like over 5,000 employees, you could probably fire 2,500 of them and you're fine. There's a lot of jobs that don't need to exist in private and public sector. It's just,
they're proving it now with the Doge thing.
Well, what's interesting about the Doge thing is not necessarily the efficiency of government. It's the inefficiency of how we allocate funds and what we do that for. So the Department of Government Efficiency is an interesting title for an entity that's kind of going over what I would call not necessarily an inefficiency, but malpractice, if not treason.
Sure.
You're taking my money and you're buying stupid shit across the world. Now, I understand the argument of soft power as much as hard power. And I've said on this podcast before that if you want to do peace in the Middle East by bribing people, by giving money to people, I'm actually okay with that, to be completely honest with you. I'd rather give somebody a dollar than a bullet, right?
Sure.
The problem with that is it can't be in perpetuity. I said that if you want to really solve the peace in the Middle East crisis, all you really have to do is give people, economic prosperity for a generation, because then you'll have a generation of kids that know only full bellies and peace, and they won't want to go to war. They won't want to be the martyrs. They won't want to bomb themselves, right? I'm okay with that. The problem is you have to have an end goal. You have to have an end point. Like, okay, we're going to give you some money. We're going to spread some quote unquote Western values, what have you. Don't kill each other. Don't kill us. Don't go to our enemies. And then at some point, you have to have an off-ramp. What are we going to do after this? How are you going to self-sustain this? You have a new quality of life. We have to maintain it. We never got to step 2.
Mm-hmm.
We were only ever at step 1, and that's how you get $40 trillion in debt. $37 trillion, but by the end of this year, when you have to refinance a lot of that short-term note, $40 trillion. And that's what you get when you print $6.5 trillion.
Well, they don't live within the means. They live differently.
Brother, living within your means is like...
They don't know what that is.
$40 trillion.
They don't have to.
$40 trillion. Never in human history has a debt that is 5% of our debt has ever been accumulated. Ever. $40 trillion by the end of this year. The number one line item in our debt, in our deficit, will be the financing charges on the short-term note that we just issued because of the interest rate hike from the Federal Reserve. Forgive me, I don't understand how we got here. I can't wrap my head around the last 25 years of U.S. policy, both foreign and domestic, to cause us to get here.
That frivolous spending to them, it's only 1%, remember?
Yeah.
1%, it's billions of dollars.
What's so crazy, too, is I was seeing some of this Doge correspondence between the masses and government officials, and the laissez-faire attitude had when talking about millions of dollars and billions of dollars. And someone will say, like, we gave $50 million of condoms to the Middle East for whatever. And a government official will be like, $50 million, that's not even, 1% of our national
They're not
debt,
living in reality.
Annual debt or whatever. Yeah. If you put $50 million in cash in a room and you put 10 people in that room, they will kill each other for that money. So don't tell me that's how things also add up. 50 million here, 100 million there, 200 million there. Now you might get to $1 billion. And $1 billion is not actually a lot of money when compared to $40 trillion. But if I was a venture capital firm and I had $1 billion of liquid cash, the amount of value and wealth that I could create with that money is astronomical. Yet we piss it away. Like, what? It makes me think to myself, like, if you told me we would get to $40 trillion of debt and there was never a hungry kid in America, and all our roads, there was not a single pothole, and you had higher education universally accepted and paid for by the government, and you had single payer or, whatever sort of healthcare that you, the individual, would actually want. Maybe you expand Medicare and Medicaid. What the nuances of this are, I'm not trying to get into the weeds, but if you told me that all the needs and wants of Americans were met and we acquired $40 trillion of debt, at the very least, I can look at that and say, yeah, but look at the prosperity we've created. Maybe we have a money-making problem. Let's tax more. The problem is you have a corporate income tax rate of 48%, which is on bonuses and stuff like that, I understand. But I pay an effective tax rate of 30%. A third of my money, or almost that, goes to the government. And just driving to this office, if there was a cop behind me, they think I was drunk because of all the potholes I have to dodge. And then the separation from the state and the federal means you also have state taxes on that. So when I say effective tax rate of 30%, I mean only federal. I have a 1% city tax because I have the luxury of living in the murder capital of the world. And then I also have to pay the state tax because, Rust Belt. Sid, I'm so sorry. I hijacked this conversation.
It's okay.
This was supposed to be about you. I get worked up about this.
It's all good. I agree. I feel the same way you do.
Am I crazy? Because you're a little older than I am. So you were also you've seen more presidents than I have. You've seen more swings both left and right. Am I incorrect in thinking that this is just a wild fucking time politically?
Well, here's the thing, man. If Trump wouldn't have been elected, we would have never known about this stuff. All this loss, all this money is just being pished away forever.
Yeah.
Forever.
Yeah.
So finally, somebody identified it, and they're looking up, and it's like, where were we? We just didn't know.
Yeah, but then, identification is one, and then action is another. And my fear
But did you know about all this government waste? I mean, we knew, but we didn't really know.
I think
Especially when you hear what it's spent on.
Very fair. I think everybody had an inclination because of what I just said. How can we be this much in debt and then nothing else is taken care of? I think it was inadvertently understood by every American citizen, at least the intelligent ones, that there was some sort of malpractice. But it's a bigger issue than that. So let me ask you this question. Even if, you find all the waste, fraud, and abuse, let's say that there's still a deficit annually. The ultimate question has to then become, do we tax more or do we spend less? This is the crux of the issue. Numerator, denominator. I think there could be arguments for both.
There's a huge surplus sitting right there in front of our face, all this money.
What do you mean, surplus sitting in front of
all this frivolous spending? I mean, if they cut that off, look how...
I don't think you're going to get to $2 trillion because that's our delta between our annual budget and our deficits, meaning we spend $6 trillion a year, but we bring in 4.5
But it's money we didn't have before.
Agreed, but I don't think you're going to find 1.5 trillion. I agree.
No, I don't think so. But we there's a lot of money out there, and they could slowly over time.
Okay, so that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, let's say, for argument's sake, we find $500 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse. Amazing. Cut that off. Beautiful. You still have a $1 trillion delta between our budget and...
Yeah, you're not going to do it overnight. It's going to take a long time.
So then that's my question is do we tax more or do we spend less? I think when you break politics down, whether you're left, right, libertarian, whatever, this is kind of the crux of the issue because you have to get to economics to understand anything else, right? Would you be team tax more or team spend less?
Spend less, but that's not the way they operate.
Well, what if I told you there was a third option and do both? So that you have to do a little bit of taxing more and a little bit of spending less. The issue I find, at least in my lifetime, and that's why I was asking you about the generational politics, is there seems to be no middle ground. There's no one.
I agree.
There's no one putting their flag down and saying, "Hey, let's increase the taxes on certain industries, on certain products, on certain, let's eliminate some of the loopholes we have in the tax code for certain whatever, but let's not necessarily hamstring the economy too much. And then let's also be a little bit more prudent with our spending. Let's be a little bit more, live within our means, as someone would say. We can do both. We can walk and chew bubble gum." I don't know this because I was only alive since 1992, and I didn't come to the U.S. until 97, 98. That's why I'm asking you, was it always so polarized? Was it always so energized? Was it always so hostile, politics?
Yeah, we're so divided. I mean, it's like night and day. And for the past 12 years, I mean, I have a lot of friends that feel the same way I do. I mean, who would want to live the last 4 years with 4 more years coming up the same way?
What if I told you we will, even with Trump?
I don't believe that.
When you print $6.5 trillion, let me take a step back. There is nothing we can do about inflation.
I agree.
There are things that we can do to try to halt it, but you cannot print $6.5 trillion in 2 years and not feel the ramifications of that. We're going to feel it for the next 2-3 years.
Well, the bottom line is energy costs.
No, the bottom line is printing
I agree with that, but what's going to help bring
$6.5 trillion.
everything down is the cost of fuel. When that comes down, that's going to reflect on everything.
Here's the unsexy truth, and I hate to say it this way. The cost of fuel is actually relatively low to where we are as a base economy. Yes, you can make...
But it's not like that in East and West Coast.
You can make things cheaper, but that's state laws and state taxes, and that's for people to vote with their feet. That's why I like the idea of states. This is actually kind of where I take my conservative hat and put on my liberal hat, because I do believe that there are things that we can do, but there are things that we have already done that will make some of what we do inescapable. You can bring down the price of fuel, but the problem is, even if we unleash the production capabilities of America, it's a world market for oil, and we still have to put that on the global market. So, like, think about it. It's not just U.S. consumption, it's everyone's consumption. You want to know who the main consumers of fuel or energy are in the world? I'll give you a hint. It's not America.
Well, it's big. It's Russia, China, India.
Not even Russia. Russia's a blimp. It's China and India.
Yeah, I believe it.
China and India.
Yeah.
So we are putting our oil up. So let's say, Trump is like, open the spigot, 100% oil productivity and production and all that. Duly noted. It will have an effect. It is not what people think it's going to be. The problem is there are very few things that we can do monetarily at this point in time outside of lowering the interest rates, because the federal debt is issued through treasury notes and people buy those notes. And if the interest rate on that is 5% versus 1% on trillions of dollars, that's an insane delta.
Yeah.
That's such this is now getting to like the financing aspect of an individual. If someone told you they're $100,000 in debt, would you tell them get a better job? Or would you tell them, dude, what the fuck are you spending money on? What's the interest rate on your credit cards? Can we refinance it through a personal loan? Can we lower that monthly payment? You start attacking this from multiple angles. This is what it's going to have to take. But what I'm trying to say though is, whether Kamala or Trump got elected, inflation was not going to stop. The only thing that can stop it, there's two things that can stop it. Number one, an AI revolution to increase and expand the economy, which is not going to happen in the next 4 years. It's just the technology is not there. And even if it was, we don't have the infrastructure in terms of energy that would need to be actually produced to power the AI revolution that we're talking about. We don't have enough gigawattage coming out of America to power warehouses of NVIDIA GPUs that can actually funnel all that compute for the actual AI that we would need en masse. Number two would be lowering interest rates.
Yeah.
And there's a deep discussion to be had on whether the Federal Reserve should be a separate entity from the federal government. And I'm not trying to sound like a big government person, but it is interesting to me that the president can appoint a Fed chair that can then outlive the president. That's an interesting prospect to me, where every other government cabinet appointee lives and dies with that president. Marco Rubio right now is Secretary of State. After 4 years, when Trump steps down of office, guess who's going to step down as Secretary of State? Unless, J.D. Vance wins, and then he says, hey, Marco, keep that job. Maybe Marco runs for president. Who knows? You know what I mean? But the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell right now, was actually issued under Trump's first term. So Biden gets Jerome Powell because Trump appointed him. Does that make sense to you? Doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to say it this way, but Biden should get to appoint his own Fed chair.
Yeah.
Why is the Federal Reserve even separated from the U.S. government anyway? Why are we even interested? I understand the issuance of debt as a country. I don't understand the issuance of an interest rate hike on that debt outside of wanting to cause unemployment. Because that's all it does. You make capital more expensive. Entities can't borrow.
How's a 25-year-old kid buy a house or buy a new car?
They don't.
They can't do
They
it.
don't.
They
Sid.
can't do it.
Sid, they don't.
It's unbelievable.
I don't know a single person under the age of 30 that owns their own home outside of me. I don't. And I know some pretty wealthy people.
Yeah.
Now, over the age of 30, I know a lot of people, but I'm talking about under the age of 30.
But in the old 20 years ago,
you could get a good house.
Yeah.
I would even say under the age of 30, getting a starter home.
Yeah.
The 1 bedroom, 2 bath. Sorry, the 1 bath, 2 bedroom.
I know what you're saying.
it's such a deeper issue too. If we all understand that true wealth comes from the acquisition of assets, and you have a subsect of the American populace that has no ownership over any assets, how can they ever build wealth? They can't. Anyone that tells you, I said this on the previous podcast with Jordan, but anyone tells you that renting is better than owning is a fucking idiot.
Well, there's no, you're going to have equity there. I mean, you're pissing it away.
If you want to give me $1,000 a month on something that I own, I will let you do that happily.
Yeah.
If you want to buy something from me and pay me in $1,000 a month installments, and then after a certain amount of time, you now own that thing, that's a lot harder for me to do because then I won't have that asset tied to me anymore.
Right.
And it should be that way. I don't know. There are some things that give me optimism. There are some things that give me pessimism. But let me go back to my original question, because like I said, you are a lot older than me in the sense of your expanse of experience with America. You've been here longer than I have and cognizant longer than I have. Am I ignorant in saying this is a weird time?
No, there's no question.
So it wasn't like this when you were little?
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, you know, my dad had a good job. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. How many stay-at-home moms are there these days?
They don't exist.
It's just
That's a unicorn now. If you find
people
one,
can't afford that unless you make, you know.
it's the 1%.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, though, too. You know, there's an article that was like, okay, even that is starting to diminish because what's happening is, as your earning potential increases, so does your cost of living because you now have higher tastes. So, like, you know, if you're making $100,000 a year as a household, and let's say your husband gets a job that makes $200,000 a year, and like the wife stays home.
Yeah.
Well, how long are you going to still live at the same house?
Yeah.
How long are you still going to drive the same car? If you're frugal with your money, maybe a long time.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of people start upgrading things. Okay, instead of driving the Chevy, I'm going to drive the BMW. Instead of the 2-bed, 1-bath, let's get the forever home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now the mortgage is more. And then you get back to that 2-person working dichotomy within the house, which is amazing if you're a government and you want to show a growth rate of your economy. I don't know.
Yeah, times are tough right now for the younger people, money-wise.
Yeah. We need to take a break from that because I was getting too fired up. Sid, you, like we said earlier in this conversation, you've been in this game for so long that you've touched so many lives, shaken so many hands, been in the corners of so many fighters, either through as a coach, as a cutman, what have you. You know, what is some of like the most proud moments you have regarding this career that you've led? Some of the moments that you've shared, some of the fighters that you've worked with, some of the things that you have done over this course of time.
One of the coolest things, Ariane, as a cutman, is to work a world title fight, wrap the guy's hands, fix his cuts, and win a belt with him. It's the coolest thing ever because you're really part of the production.
Is that something that the fighters get to choose? Like if I'm a championship, I'm fighting for the Bellator belt.
Yeah.
Can I go to the promotion and say, I want Sid to wrap my hands, I want Sid to be my cut man in between rounds? Can I make that call?
Yes, that doesn't really happen a lot. I mean, as far as who we wrap hands, yes, always. You want a certain guy, you always have them. But 1 week, Craig and I will do the TV fights, the last 3 fights. The next week, Dean and Matt will do the other ones. So we just switch off. So the way it normally
that's
goes.
if you have a team that's comfortable with that.
Oh yeah, we have 4 guys or 5 guys now. But so what we do is we get our assignments. I've got to wrap these guys, and so everybody be wrapping hands before the show starts. Then when the prelims start, whoever's working TV will go back and we'll work the prelims, and those guys will start coming in waves, and they'll wrap them.
You mean the guys that are coming in after the prelims,
Right.
right?
There's
So the
usually
initial
3
4
waves.
to 6
You've got
fights.
the prelims, late prelims, and then TV.
Yeah.
And so we start wrapping at 5 o'clock. Or we start wrapping at 3 o'clock. Prelims start at 5, and TV starts at 7.
You're basically wrapping hands for like
So it's a
hours.
long day. Yeah. So either we're working cuts or we're wrapping hands, but everybody's busy all the time. So with our assignments, we know where to go. We know what we're doing.
Do you switch off? Like, will you be wrapping the prelims and then maybe working the prelims while the other two cutman?
So we all wrap hands in the beginning, and then let's say me and Craig will go work prelims. Matt and Dean are still wrapping.
Gotcha.
And then we get through the prelims, we go wrap, they come out and work.
Gotcha.
So everybody's always working. So it's a long day, but
And that's a system that you guys have all kind of coordinated amongst yourself. It's not given to you by Bellator.
no, Matt, the head cutman, decides who does what. But he always knows who's got to work the previous main event. So he's a very humble guy. We always get to work both.
Nice.
Yeah.
But then sometimes you'll have a fighter who you really want to work with, and then what? Do you just basically say like, "Hey, I'm wrapping his hands."
Well,
I'm gonna be there."
they'll ask for us.
Gotcha.
And then sometimes it's like in Dublin, Johnny's my boy, so I had to work the main event. So
And they let you. And then
of course.
when you say that Johnny's my boy and I had to work the main event, would you say that this is also, because I always look for the culmination of moments in someone's craft. Would you say that, Johnny fighting in Dublin for the belt, you're the cornerman, this is the culmination of why you do this?
Yeah. I mean, it's the highest level. Undefeated fighter, fighting for the world title in front of millions of people, in Dublin. It's a real rush. It's a real rush. I mean, to work Madison Square Garden, we did it twice. I mean, everybody wants to work that. As a cutman or fighter, to say you've been in the Garden is really something. It's the highest level.
Well, anyone. Maybe I'm incorrect in this, and if I am, please correct me, but shouldn't the cutmen have a sense of unbiased attention, or am I incorrect? Are you allowed to have favorites?
Sure. I mean, everybody, the world champions are your favorites because they're the high-profile guys. But yeah, you always have like Arlene Bledko. She's from Australia. We got to be friends. I always wrap her hands. She'd have a fit if I didn't wrap her hands. And so sometimes, it's all about the fighter. I can wrap hands in many different ways. Not the way I want to do it. It's what you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
It's all about the fighter.
I remember when you and Craig, you guys were very inquisitive whenever wrapping hands. You would ask, do you want more on the wrist? Do you want more on the knuckles? Do you want
your
me to
thumb
cut
wrapped?
off?
Yes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I got my hands wrapped by one of you, I was like, Jesus, I don't fucking know. You tell me, what's best. And then you would tell me. I think I did say that to you, and you were like, well, what do you want? And I go, brother.
See, here's the thing. I prefer to wrap thumbs, and all the high-level guys get their thumbs wrapped. Now, an MMA glove, there's absolutely no protection for the thumb. Bellator has a little thumb. UFC has no thumb. See, this joint's been broken hundreds of times, even when you do it right, because that's the weak spot right there. So we do a lot of work there.
Even when you do like a check 3 or something.
It's just the fact that the thumb gets caught.
You might not have the time to turn the fist. I'm just trying to hit you. I can't tell you how many times I've hit someone with the side of my
Daniel
hand.
Cormier
instead
used to
of
punch like this, Aaron, with his thumbs out.
Jesus.
He never wrapped his thumbs.
Jesus Christ.
So
Well, I didn't wrap my hands the last couple of fights, but I'm not even saying that's improper punching.
yes,
technique.
yes.
Close that fucking.
I
game.
get guys. I go make a fist in karate.
No,
I mean, I swear
you're
they do
kidding me.
this. Their thumbs are sticking out.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Well, they've obviously never been trained by a really great guy.
You know who taught me?
Huh.
J.D. Amato.
Yes.
Make the hand
Yes.
flat. It should
Yes.
be
A right
flat.
angle. You want
Yes.
a right angle.
He told me that.
Yes.
Because I remember I was punching and my middle knuckle was getting bruised. And he's like, it's because you're not making a good fist. And I was
Yes.
like, Jay, how can I not be making a good fist? Look at
Yes.
this. And then he would show me. He had the best way to describe it is he had a gorilla hand. So when he closed his hand, it was all the knuckles were perforated and completely flat.
Yeah. See, this right angle is all of
Yes.
it right there.
So now to this day,
Yes.
shout out J.D. Amato, rest in
Yes.
peace. But no, that doesn't shock me. Simultaneously, it does shock
Yeah.
me.
No, I actually literally take their thumb and I'll wrap it around the fist.
No
I
way.
do.
Well, then how do they open it?
Huh? No. I'm talking about when I say make a fist, I'll take their thumb. I go,
Oh,
this is
you'll-
how you
you'll
do
fix
it.
that.
Because they don't know how to make a
Fucking
fist.
the cut man is fixing the fighter's poor form. Oh my god.
Harry, the funniest one ever. You know how the guys sit down backwards in the chair?
Yeah,
I've
the
got
chair to
pad
chair
here.
so you can put your
I have
hand
a
over
kid
it.
sit down like this.
Oh,
I go, is this your first
Away
fight? He
from
goes, how do you know? I go, well, normally you face me. He turned around. Oh my God, it was so funny.
God bless.
Yeah, only one guy But it was so funny because I go, normally you face me.
Dude, tell me the whiplash that you must have from like when you worked a Bellator event and then you would like, work with like a Johnny Eblin or some of these like guys that were like world class athletes, and then you would come to like a Shamrock or an NFA show or whatever and like work the amateurs who are sat the other way because they don't know what they're doing.
Craig and I work so many shows together, and we'll get a guy, he goes, I want the hybrid rap. I go, what is that? He goes, well, I don't know. He heard it. He heard the name. So
It was on Twitter.
most guys have no idea. But once you wrap their hands, they're like, hey, this feels pretty good. And believe it or not, we reuse those wraps, the fighters. You cut the wrist off,
And then you can tape it
slide it
afterwards.
off, and then you can use it 4 or 5 times.
I used mine more than that. I remember when I was an amateur and I first got them wrapped because I was poor. Dude, I was so broke. I didn't have hand wraps. So my very first amateur fight, I think it was either you. It may have not been you, my first amateur fight, but whoever wrapped my hands told me that. Afterwards, they cut them off and they're like, hey, you can reuse these if you want. And I go, how? He's like, you can just tape up the part that we're cutting
wrist,
off.
yeah.
So for like a month, which was, by the way, gentlemen, way too long.
Yeah, those wraps smelled real good when you were done.
Dude, I'm pretty sure my sweat started eating the material. But for a month, I had hand wraps.
Yeah.
Where does this lie with you now, Sid? Like, I want to be careful how I ask this because, like, you're not done, right? Like, it's not like you're, like, taking off past the pasture to be shot in the head or something. I hate to say it this way, but I have to. What gets the jollies now? Are you just content with like the status quo? Do you just want to work the events that you can?
Yeah.
What's the goal now?
Well, I'm down to 4 days a week. I'm off on Wednesdays. I fish and golf on Wednesdays, one or the other. Teach karate Monday,
Do
Monday,
podcasts.
Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. But I still love going to fights. I love being right in the middle of it. I mean, when you're a cut man at a high level show, sitting behind the coaches, you get to hear everything they say.
What if it's not a high level show? What if it's just like amateurs?
I still enjoy it.
Yeah.
But it's not work for me. And the best part is they give you a check at the end of the show. It's like, really?
I would have paid you.
Because Craig and I were wrapping hands. We talk. I mean, we could do it with our eyes closed.
Yeah.
Fixing cuts is nothing. So, but I'm also mentoring a lot of cut men. I've worked with probably 10 people.
Coming up.
Yes, and I teach them everything I know. One thing I have to say about Stitch Duran, probably the most famous cutman in the world, when he came to Bellator, he had no secrets. He shared everything he knew with us. Now, there wasn't a lot of things that we learned from him. I learned a few things, but in the old days, the cutmen always went to their deathbed with their secrets. They never divulged how they wrapped hands, how they fixed cuts. It was secret.
Do you think that's a generational divide? 'Cause
Yes.
That's also how martial arts was,
Yes.
right? It's like everyone wanted to covet and hold their information.
Yeah.
Now it's like everyone knows everything and everything's on YouTube.
Yeah. No, it's changed a lot, and it's good because why not share your knowledge?
Yeah.
You know, I've got nothing to hide, so it makes me feel good to help somebody get ahead.
I had a professor in university that had a quote that really kind of shaped how I think about knowledge. And he said that everything that we know is not owned unless we come up with it ourselves. But even that has the sprinklings of ownership from other people because we rent everything that we've ever
It's like
learned.
music. They're trying to, say this is copyright, it's copyright. Music's music. I mean, it's all so it's the same thing. Hand wrapping has evolved. But
you learned from someone, right?
Yes.
So someone taught you.
Yes.
They didn't own it. They gave it to you.
And we all do it different.
But what I'm trying to say is you may have modified it, maybe added, maybe taken away. But what I'm trying to say though is like that fabric, that core, you didn't come up with. It was given to you.
Right.
Who are you to prevent the next generation from having some of that?
Yeah.
I think that's what it comes down to. It's like I didn't learn how to fight on my own. People taught me.
Right.
How did they teach me? Someone taught them. I coach now wrestling because I feel like I need to give back to the programs
Exactly.
they gave to me.
That's what I feel.
I don't own this knowledge. I was merely renting it. And then someday I'll be in the dirt and hopefully the next generation that I taught will teach the next generation. I hope.
It's so weird that there's not very many coaches that know how to wrap hands. But why would they if we do it?
Well, I was going to say, it's outsourced.
Right.
Why would they?
To me, when they come in, if I were a fighter, I'd want me to wrap the hands rather than the coach. Now, there's a bond, and I get that. But sometimes, like I said, I've had 5 broken hands and thousands of reps.
Sid, I want the best capable person to do that job.
Exactly.
I don't
Exactly.
care. Like, that's why I kind of asked you about that bias question, though, because if I can revisit that, I was fortunate to always know you guys. So whenever I went to any of the fights that I had, I knew you, I knew Craig, I knew Driesbach and all these other guys because of Jay.
Yeah.
So whenever I was going to get my hands wrapped, I remember like Craig would be like, "Who do you want to wrap your hands?" I was like, "Whoever's open." Like I trusted you, I trusted Craig, I trusted Driesbach, I trusted essentially everybody in the back. I felt like was my friend.
Sure.
Does that make sense? And I felt like no matter who did it, they would do a fine job. Not everybody, like I'm talking about the people that I knew, right? So like there's been more cutman, and forgive me, cutman, that I've said no to. No hard feelings. It's just that, you know, if Craig or Sid or somebody else was there, I know them. I felt comfortable with them. It was more of like a seniority thing or a legacy thing. But that's why I asked you that question about like bias, because I always felt that you guys liked me. And because you guys liked me, you would go above and beyond for me.
Yes.
I was never in an instance or an event where I didn't feel like the hometown kid. But if I wasn't, that would give me some weird feelings. Like, oh, that cut man is really jolly with my opponent. What the fuck? Like, by the way, it's human nature, right? You can't prevent that. But it is an interesting paradigm. Don't you agree?
Yeah, we have favorites. We have fighters that we like, but everybody gets the best rap that's available.
No matter what?
Yeah, and it's not about me. It's about them.
So you're rapping Johnny Eblin's opponent before that fight.
That wouldn't happen.
But if it did,
I would do the best I could possibly do. Because if he broke his hand, I would feel guilty.
Gotcha.
So I'm going to give them the best hand rep possible. It doesn't matter who does it.
That's the perfect answer.
Yeah.
That's the perfect answer.
But like we were talking about before, a lot of guys that wrestle don't get their hands wrapped. Or they may do a strip of tape.
Well, you want to know what it was more than anything? I got confident with my hands.
Yeah.
There was a moment in time where I wasn't confident with my hands. And then I remember I watched a Rory McDonald interview on JRE, interview podcast. And Rory McDonald, that was the very first time I've ever heard a fighter say that they don't wrap their hands. Now, here's the thing. There are pros and cons to everything.
Yes.
So by not wrapping my hands, I was taking a risk because a lot of the hand wrap forces compression on the wrist, the knuckles, keeps everything tight. So like when I wouldn't wrap my hands, I had to make sure to kind of create that tightness myself. By the way, one thing I also stole from Bas Rutten was how he locked his hand. He would say that when he wasn't doing pancrase, the way he would punch is kind of locking the wrist.
Yes.
So that no matter what,
yes,
he knew that when he was making contact, it was with his whole arm intact. And a lot of times when guys break their hands, it's because they're making contact with their hand, but their technique or the structure isn't behind it. So sometimes the hand rolls, or you're hitting.
They hit with the little knuckle.
Yes, or they're missing the mark.
Yes.
So like they're hitting with maybe half the hand
yes,
instead of the whole hand. And then something as simple as just turning the hand. So either you miss completely or hit completely. There were some fundamental technical things that I had to take into consideration when taking that risk. But for me, at the individual level, for the last 3 or 4 fights that I had, the juice was worth the squeeze because of the benefits that I got. Specifically, I could use the smaller glove, less padding. I could also feel everything that I was doing. So it was immediate reaction of like whether or not that shot that I landed was adequate or not. And then more importantly than anything, the ability to grapple was made infinitely easier because of that. If there's somehow in the future a way where you can wrap just the top and the wrist and not have to inhibit the grip, that'll change the game. I would then go back to wrapping my hands. But the amount of grappling advantages that I would get from not wrapping made it infinitesimal.
You see, Mike Chandler, when I wrapped his hands, I'd wrap his thumb.
So
a full wrap.
But Chandler might be a grappler, but he turned into a lethal striker.
Yeah. But a lot of Machida, Bader, all the guys.
How many guys, if you were to do a pie chart for me, how many people don't wrap their hands versus do?
It'd be, how many guys don't in MMA?
Yes.
1%.
1% don't wrap their hands.
Yeah, it's very rare.
Really? Okay, so maybe
one guy a show, maybe.
Thanks, Rory McDonald. Appreciate you, brother. But here's the thing: I've never broken my hand.
It works for you.
Yeah, and I've gotten knockouts, I've gotten submissions, I've had everything under the rainbow. Maybe I also just got lucky. Here's the other caveat, and I hate to diminish myself, but I also never fought at the highest level. So this is also
But fighting's fighting. Your hands are going.
But the nuance of it is I'm not fighting the killers of the killers of the killers. I'm fighting the best guys locally and nationally, because at the end there, I was getting guys from throughout America. Right?
Yeah.
But I wasn't fighting at the UFC, Bellator, PFL. I wasn't. Maybe I would have gone back to the
But the bottom line for wrapping hands, it's to give the guy confidence. And when I fought, I was kind of superstitious. Certain things had to be a certain way when I fought. And if I wrap your hands and you win, and if I don't wrap your hands, you kind of feel like it's not going to work today. We want you to go in there with all confidence in the world that, yeah, Sid wrapped my hands or Craig wrapped my hands. Certain guys have certain guys, and it's just got to be that way.
Kind of like, not superstitious, but routine.
Yeah.
The routine of the fight.
It's whatever makes you feel comfortable.
That's interesting.
And it's about confidence in fighting. You know that. It's everything.
It's everything. Can I ask you, before we end this podcast, because I want to make sure that I touch on this topic, because I do think that it's happening, and I touched on it briefly with Rodrigo, but I'd like to understand your reaction. I think that a lot of the things that have plagued karate specifically, the oversaturation of the martial art, is currently right now happening in real time with jiu-jitsu.
I agree.
Where in the 80s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, you could not see like a strip mall without a karate.
Karate was always the staple.
Yes.
But jiu-jitsu has changed it. It's a different mindset now.
Well, I would also say that, and I hate to say this in front of you, I think if you were to tell me which base is the most important in mixed martial arts, it is without a doubt grappling.
There's no question.
Because the fight
always goes to the ground.
If it doesn't end in a strike, will.
Yes.
If it doesn't end in a strike, will.
Yes.
And you want to make it sure. I always tell people, you don't need to know enough jiu-jitsu and grappling to submit somebody. You need to know enough to get back to your feet.
Right.
Yeah, to just defend. If you don't want to submit
Machida is a black belt in jiu-jitsu, but you never know it.
Yeah. Because of his
but he could
style.
defend takedowns. He could shoot. He had enough just to get by. That's rare. But if people always ask me, what's the best art to have going into MMA? It's wrestling.
I think wrestling, jiu-jitsu, that combination, whether you do one or over.
See, what makes me different is everybody does boxing or kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, and wrestling. But the karate is a gray area. The running punch, spinning back fist, just the theory of run, jam. They don't get that.
Well, the problem is it's not sexy. It's okay. If you talk to any fighter about range manipulation, about timing, about feints, every single good fighter will look at you and go, fuck yeah, that's important. The problem is these are those mental calculations. Like when you see, Darren Till versus Robert Whittaker, and there's not a whole lot of action because the guys are trying to basically feint and set each other up, and they're trying to get the timing down, and they're both trying to explode. The educated fighter sees the mental calculus both guys are doing.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with what you're talking about. It's not the flashy KO. It's not the crazy transition submission. It's all the nuance that the average casual fan just doesn't value or see or even honestly interpret. They don't even know what they're watching, right? Why aren't they fucking going? Because both guys they don't see any openings.
Yeah.
Both guys know that if they commit, the other guy's going to counter. And they don't know if they have an answer to that counter. And you'll get the casual fan that's like, this is a boring fight. Meanwhile, I'm watching this fight on the edge of my feet because I know it's one miscalculation away from a highlight reel knockout.
Yeah. The other crazy thing are 5-minute rounds. There's never been a sport where it has 5-minute rounds.
Good or bad?
I think it's great. They're the best the best athletes in the world. But to watch them go 5 minutes is unbelievable.
Yeah.
You look at your watch they have it wrong and they're still going.
What do you think about the criticisms about the rounds? Do you think that MMA should ever get to the point where it's one 15-minute round?
No.
Why not?
Because you got to be able to recharge your batteries and come back and start again. Coaching, round by round.
Fair. That's a great point to make, the round by round adjustments. But what do you say about the criticism about people saying that there would be more finishes if there was one 15-minute round?
Possibly, maybe. But you got to be able to recharge your batteries,
I think it's not so much about recharging the batteries as much as it's the second thing you said.
Yeah.
For me, whenever I cornered anybody, I always felt like I was barely ever listened to in the round. That I had about 30 seconds, if I was lucky, to get the heart rate down in between rounds, to get them to look at me and relax and say, okay, 2-3 things you're doing wrong, one opening I see. That's all I can do in
Yeah.
that short amount of time.
Yeah.
But I can't tell you how invaluable that is as a corner.
There's no question.
If you took that away from me, I honestly say, like, you know, I'll hang out in the back with you. I'll prep you up. I'll make you feel good and confident. But if you're not going to have rounds, there's not a whole lot that I have to, like, actually offer you, because you're so in the moment. You're so, like, locked in that you're probably not really going to adjust a whole lot of what you're doing.
It's so important to have a fighter that listens to you. And I tell my fighters, if you listen to me and lose, it's on me. But if you don't listen to me and you lose, it's on you.
But would you agree in saying that that is the vast minority of fighters that can do that? Because they have to be calm enough in that moment to listen, and then they have to be educated enough to take your instruction and then apply it.
Yeah.
Those are two very difficult.
I agree.
Very
But
difficult
that's part of being
variables.
my fighter, the fact that you will listen to me, you have confidence in my ability, and I'm going to take care of everything. All you got to do is fight.
Let me add a question to that, though. Don't you want to get to a fighter to the position to where they're doing things correctly by their own, and that they don't need, or at the very least, they need minimal interaction from you?
Yes,
Because
but
the best cornerman is the cornerman that has to say nothing. You're doing
yeah,
everything
but the
great.
guy on the outside can see it a lot better than you can when you're fighting.
Very fair.
So he may not. Johnny Evelyn came out really strong faking, and second round he was got hit more. Johnny, you got to move, you got to bounce, you got to fake. So those are things you don't know that somebody on the outside can tell you.
Vice versa, though, you might see certain things in the fight, but you don't understand the fatigue or the damage the fighter feels. He might have gotten hit by something that you're like, I've seen him get hit by that stuff 1,000 times in the cage, but maybe it hurt him.
Yeah.
Maybe he's dizzy. Maybe he's like, and he's just trying to play it cool. I often say that there's always that disconnect between communication between the fighter and the coach, because the coach is seeing everything, the fighter's not, but the fighter is feeling everything,
Yes.
the coach is not.
Yes.
And that's the rub.
Yes. I've seen a lot of fights, though, where when the coach says do this, it's just changed the fight because it was
Yes.
the one ingredient that wasn't there, and all of a sudden he's smoking this guy.
I agree with you 100%. Or you see someone losing one round, and then they come back the second round, and you're like, what the fuck happened? And then you go back and listen to the corner's instruction, and the corner's like, okay, that was our game plan, not working,
Yeah.
pivot.
Well, you get a grappler, you're not going to throw high kicks, you know,
Why not?
because I don't want to be on my back.
Well, what if you have confidence in your ability to get back up?
You got to set it up, though. But the point is, there's certain things you do and you don't do.
I agree.
And if they're doing,
I'm just being devil's advocate.
no,
by the
that's,
way.
I get that, but it's so much fun to be behind the coach and listen to the world class coaches, because they're saying everything I'm thinking, and then they'll get a Houston Alexander at the end of his career. His dad was his coach. They had no money, and he was just out there. I had to give him water bottle and towels. He had nothing, so his dad was his coach because he didn't have any money.
Do you think that's kind of sad?
It is
at that
sad.
point in that
At the end of his
career?
career, he's got, they're hanging on.
This is the part of fighting I actually desperately and deeply dislike.
Yeah.
Is the
Well, you're a racehorse. You can't quit. You just can't quit.
well, it's an overwhelming poverty in this sport for some reason.
Well, you see these guys up here, and then 5 years later, they got nothing.
We were talking off the record, and I want to keep it off the record, but we were talking about like the business proposition of fighting and promoting and all that stuff. Do you think that, and maybe I'm wrong, do you think that the inequities that present themselves in the fight game, specifically MMA, because boxing at the highest level doesn't necessarily have this, is conducive because the business model is just fundamentally broken?
Well, there's no insurance, right? What fighters get insurance?
Well, they have insurance for that
For that-
individual
right.
fight.
But like Lance
How many
Benoist,
fighters went into a fight injured?
see, I never knew that, but I learned that really
That is
quick.
common.
When guys told me,
I had a broken hand. I
jammed
went into
finger,
the fight.
a torn
Yes.
knee, you never know.
But so I know, I will not say their names. I know of guys that have gone into fights with broken.
I've repped broken
Or
hand before, and I
torn.
knew it. I knew it. He knew, but he needed the money.
Yes.
That's how bad it was.
Not even they needed the money. They needed the money, but then they also knew that, okay, if I break my hand in practice, I don't have health insurance for my employer, or maybe I don't know what that person's life consists of. But they know that if they go to the hospital, they're footing the bill. But if they go to this fight, they can hit one jab and say, I broke my hand in that jab, not knowing it was a pre-existing condition, and then they're covered under the liabilities of that individual promotion at that
Yeah.
individual time. And the fact that is even a thing.
Yeah.
I hate this because there's the conservative side of me that's like, hey, open market and all this other stuff. But then there's the liberal side of me that's like, these guys are putting it all on the line.
Yeah.
I wish the market was more saturated. I wish the opportunities were more available. I wish these guys could make an honest living doing this. I don't know, because I haven't run my own promotion, what under the hood looks like. But, you know, when I see Shamrock is successful, but like, you know, Midwest successful, and NFA can get through the shows, but they might be lucky to make $5 or $10 grand a show. Like, they're not. It's not like these guys are making a whole lot of money.
Yeah, well, you got to have competition. You know, the problem with UFC is one championship is losing money, PFL's losing money. So eventually, you got to have somebody out there to compete.
So then the argument can be made that maybe the UFC is doing it the right way. They're the only ones making profitable. Maybe that is the business model that works. And the business model that works is the fighters don't get insurance, the fighters don't get retirement, the fighters don't get equity.
At Bellator, I think we're paying 19% of our gross. They say that UFC is paying 10% of their gross. The fighters.
Even if they are, the UFC fighters are making more. Because the gross is more.
Correct, but it's still not that much money.
In terms of percentage, I agree. But then this is the problem with metrics and debate is like, what do you think is fair? Do you think 50% is fair? Like what percentage do you think
I
it
think
should be?
in baseball and football and basketball, it's close to 50%.
Yeah, but those are also unions, and the teams are privately
The thing
owned.
is, but they've been around a long time too. You know, MMA is still new.
Yeah, but the difference is the structure of the sport and the season. The problem is when you have year-round fighting. Okay, let me put it to you this way. If you had 6 months out of the year where fighting was a thing, and these guys could spend 6 months afterwards just recovering and healing their broken bodies from that, maybe you can get that to work. The problem is it's year-round.
Yeah.
There's no
off season.
NFL season. There's no off season. There's no preseason. If a fighter fights 3 times in a year, that's a good year.
Yeah.
4 is you were busy. That's one every 3 months.
used to fight a lot, remember?
Well, that's what that means is you went through a full camp, had a fight, and then immediately went to another full camp and a fight, and another full camp and a fight. So 4 times in 1 year is a lot.
Yeah.
So then you have to think to yourself, like, numerically speaking, how much money am I going to offer you to fight 4 times a year? And is the juice worth the squeeze? For some fighters at the highest level, it is. You get one Conor McGregor fight, it'll pay for itself. But for the guys that are, and I want to be careful how I do this because I don't want to come across as crass or that I think I'm better than anybody. That's not the case. But for the fighters lower on the totem pole, maybe their debut or whatever, no one knows who they are outside of the hometown crowd. They're not worth the squeeze of like a salary. They are worth the 12 and 12, which, let's be honest, we were kind of poo-pooing on that earlier, but I don't know of a single promotion outside of the UFC that pays the fighters 12 and 12 for their starting fight.
Yeah.
Not Bellator, not PFL, not LFA, none of them. None of them.
Well, what's unique about MMA and that nowhere else, it's win and show. The other guy doesn't get the money.
I hate that.
That's terrible.
I hate that.
But I mean, what other sport is like that? Nowhere.
I hate that.
But in your mind, you're winning both. But it doesn't happen.
you know what some of the fighters do after they get to a certain point. Some of the fighters negotiate, so everything's a contract with
Makes
these
sense.
fighters.
Why
Some of
wouldn't
them
you?
will negotiate a flat fee.
Yeah.
Which I hate that you have to get to a point where you have leverage to negotiate a flat fee. The idea was, and let me kind of elaborate this for some people that might not know, in fighting, what they have is show and win money. The idea, the precursor to this was the UFC wanted to incorporate exciting fights and they wanted fighters to go out there with the incentive to win so that they could earn extra money. The issue is everybody that fights is not trying to go in there at that level. At the lower levels, you got your journeyman losers that'll lose, and they basically show up for travel money and the purse. I get
payday
that.
is all it is.
But once you get to the UFC, these guys are all fighting for their life every fight. Everyone's trying to fight for the next contract, for the next negotiation. They're trying to be the best in the world. And I hate to say it this way because I think Johnny Eblen is one of the best fighters in that weight division in the world. But universally it is accepted that the UFC champion is the best in that weight class at any given time. So if you're in the UFC, it's healthy, it's correct to say that you are also chasing the best to be the best in the world.
Yeah.
Who are you to say that these guys are trying to just get paid on show money? Now, maybe the go between is like they tell you that the finances don't make sense. Okay, instead of paying everybody 12 and 12 for their starting, pay them 18,000 flat, and then pocket the 4 delta, because the delta is actually no delta at all, right? It's like the winner will make their show money or show and win money, and the loser will only make their show. Bridge that delta, everybody can make 18. The problem with that is that's socialism incarnate.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
that the precedent's set for that, you know.
That's the problem.
So
the precedent was set.
how do you change it?
You pay everybody 24 to start, 24 flat, because we know all of you are trying to win.
Yeah.
But from a business perspective, why would you increase your labor expense by 50%?
No, everybody knows that UFC's cheap, but
Not 50%, 25%, sorry.
everybody knows they're cheap, but they're, you know,
But are they cheap because they're the highest paying promotion? The UFC fighters are the only ones retiring. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
hate to say it that way, but they are. How many Bellator fighters can retire after Bellator? 1 or 2
Yeah,
that I
there's-
know
yeah,
of?
yeah.
How many UFC fighters have retired legitimately? A lot more. But you know, they're more successful, so it's to be expected. You know, it's a logical question, and this is what I'll ask you. There's no right answer. Should a fighter be able to retire just by virtue of being in the UFC?
if he makes enough money,
So let's say someone is like the journeyman 500 guy, never cracks the top 10, but maybe he's like top 13, top 14. Should they, by the end of their career, have enough money to retire?
it's their choice. I mean, they chose that fight.
No, I'm saying,
no.
should they have enough finances in the bank to retire?
It's like being a karate instructor. I'm never going to be a millionaire. I'm making good money and I'm happy, but I'm never going to be a millionaire. I just know because nobody, you know.
The caveat to that, you're not wrong. The caveat to that, though, is the price that they are paying physically is far superior than the price you're paying physically. Every fight.
Oh, I agree.
Is a
Those
war.
guys, when they're done, they're done. I mean,
Yes.
they're just,
So I heard it explained to me in a way that made other sports really resonate. They were like, you know, why do NFL players and NHL players and all these guys make this much money? And the reason is the window of opportunity to make that much money is so small.
plus, what are they going to do when they're done?
Yeah, it was
That's
actually,
it.
It was actually Tavon Taylor that did it on a podcast, and I think Tavon is absolutely correct. It's like, you know, if you're spending all this time making it to the NFL and then the average, you know, career is only like 2.5 seasons or whatever, you want to make sure that you walk away with at least millions of dollars so that you can not even live lavishly, but live middle class.
Yeah,
for the rest
just
of
be
your
able
life.
to live out the rest of your time.
The question is, are UFC fighters of adequate athleticism and investment to constitute the same reaction?
The highest level guys obviously are going to make it, you know.
Yes, they're going to be fine.
But it's like any sport, you know, if you're not at the highest level, the money's not there.
I don't think that's necessarily the case, because even the kickers in the NFL make, like, I think it's like league minimum is like $400,000 a year. The majority of the UFC roster will not make $400,000
Yeah,
this year. The majority,
Right.
not the minority. Sub 70% of the guys will not make $400,000 this year. A secondary kicker on the worst NFL team will make at least $400,000.
Yep.
That's their only job. There are UFC fighters that are still waiting tables.
But remember, in the old days, like baseball players used to have to get second jobs. Did you know that?
Yes, I do know that, and that's why you had the notorious Black Sox incident where they basically bet against themselves and then threw the World Series in order to make more money.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of this could be constituted to nascency. That MMA is just a younger sport.
Yep.
Duly noted.
Yep.
But I don't necessarily see a trajectory that's changing anytime soon.
No,
That's
I don't
what
know.
worries me.
Yeah.
The UFC is the monolith. They are the monopoly, and they do it better than anybody. They have the best fights, the best fighters. Duly noted. But what worries me is this aggregation of the top and this cycling of the bottom. And it's like a meat grinder, dude. Look at Dakota Bush. Look at some of these guys. Like, they're really great fighters. 1 or 2 losses get cut.
Yeah.
Why?
No, it's
a
a
meat
dog-eat-dog
grinder back
word.
then.
It is.
And then once you get to the top
But
15,
look at Joaquin Buckley. He was with Bellator, washed out, went to UFC.
he was a 500 fighter at 85. It's when he dropped down to 170.
But the other thing is, it's matchups.
I also think it's maturity. Joaquin Buckley has had a career of tough fights. Does that make sense?
Well, he's a great stand fighter. They gave him Logan Storley. He's one of the greatest wrestlers in Bellator. I mean,
they
it's
did not.
matchups.
They did not set him up for success
No,
at
it's
Bellator. I agree with
matchups.
that one. And then to see how well he did, considering, is still admirable. I think Joaquin Buckley is an immense talent.
The other thing, St. Louis has got a really hot bid for
Isn't it?
MMA fighters.
Isn't it? 11-0
Sean
last
Woodson.
year. Evan Elder, Charles Johnson, Joaquin Buckley. You could even call. I know it's not technically like St. Louis, but like Garrett Armfield out of Eureka.
Yes.
You got the guys from KC that I know that are like training in like Coconut Creek, but like Grant Dawson. You know what I mean? These are all Missouri guys.
Yep.
And Julius Walker that just got signed.
Well, Adam Sella was on the Ultimate Fighter.
Yes. So
Kyle.
Michael Johnson. The Rust Belt has proven itself to be an adequate purveyor of high level fighting.
Yeah.
No question.
You know what's crazy? Out of all these jiu-jitsu schools in St. Louis, St. Charles, all these great, there's never been a great striker. Great jiu-jitsu, but never a great striker.
Expand. You mean like from St. Charles MMA?
Or from MMA, St. Louis guys. Sean Woodson's a good puncher, but I mean just their jiu-jitsu is unbelievable. I think it's better than their stand-up.
I mean, technically, you could make the comment of Tyron Woodley. I mean, he ended up being the world champion, and he was known for his striking. When you say good striker, do you mean explosive and dangerous, or do you mean technical?
I mean dangerous.
Than Tyron Woodley.
Yeah, but
he was an NCAA All-American.
Did I tell you I showed him the running punch?
Yeah. And then he used it against Jay Haran.
He did.
But I mean, that would be I would also make it's a loaded question because it's like, how do you become, such a...
But everybody's got their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say. Like, okay, well, like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is a phenomenal karate guy,
right,
but I wouldn't put him against, black belts at a jiu-jitsu tournament.
No, there's no way.
So I understand the notion that you're kind of scratching at, but I mean, it's kind of a loaded question. It's like, well, of course. Why would jiu-jitsu schools produce high-level strikers?
No, that's what I'm saying. It's just we haven't seen... I mean, the jiu-jitsu in this town is just off the charts.
I would say the everything in this town is off the charts. The MMA, the striking, the jiu-jitsu, St. Louis, Kansas City, Springfield, Missouri are just good places to produce savages.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the things that I was trying to really do with this podcast is open a line of communication between people where it could possibly be determined that there was hostility and realize that there's actually a lot of admirable qualities within them. And I would also venture to say that the St. Louis MMA community has never been more united and positive amongst one another in my lifetime, in what I've seen. And I think that's a direct correlation to success, right? When there's scarcity, you become more competitive, but when there's an abundance, you become more inclusive.
And every top gym has a guy in the UFC.
Yeah, Wolves Den has Sean. St. Charles MMA has... St. Charles MMA doesn't have a UFC fighter dedicated to them, do they? Tyron's training there. Buckley is not, to my knowledge, Buckley does not represent St. Charles MMA.
They had tons previous.
They have.
Yeah.
St. Charles MMA has produced the most UFC fighters.
Yep.
From Lance, Sampo, Alp. I mean, yes, without question. Listen, if the question is who is the premier gym, and I'm sorry to Wolves Den, it is without question St. Charles MMA.
I agree.
They have produced the most people, and then you say, well, okay, St. Charles MMA has been there longer than Wolves Den. Correct. But Wolves Den, in its decade run, has only produced one UFC fighter. Mike Rogers, in his first decade, has produced like 3 or 4.
Yeah. But I mean, through the years, 10?
Maybe more.
Yeah.
Because think about how many people, okay, what do we constitute someone that he's made? People that have walked through, people that have started there. So then by that logic, Cortavius was there, is in the UFC now. Charles Johnson. Tyron Woodley. You can make the argument Michael Chandler because he started there as well. He didn't start in St. Charles MMA, but he did a skid there. Lance Benoist, Alp, Josh Sampo, Jake Roberts made Bellator, so like you could almost say that as well. EJ Brooks made Bellator, and that's the other topic, right? Is like how many guys have went there and then went to Bellator or Strikeforce or what have you. It's like Tyron started at Strikeforce before he went to the UFC.
Yeah.
When they got bought out. It's without question, St. Charles MMA is the premier gym in terms of legacy and the production of fighters. And I would even go as far as to say is, if you were to look at its professional roster.
And Julius.
Yeah.
He fought for the world title
Yes,
in
he fought
Bellator.
Vadim Nemkov.
Yeah, knocked him down.
Yes, in the first round. Yeah. Anyway, but what I'm trying to say though is like even if you take all the accolades out of the way, because right now Wolves Den has a UFC fighter and St. Charles MMA doesn't. That's a fact. Wolves Den has a UFC fighter. St. Charles MMA does not have a dedicated. Charles Johnson trains elsewhere. Buckley trains elsewhere. Tyron trains elsewhere. If that changes in the future, then I will happily eat my words and I'll say St. Charles MMA has a UFC fighter right now. However, what St. Charles MMA does have is like 10 fucking killers at the professional level.
Yeah.
And I think Wolves Den has Sean, Tavon.
Justin Lawrence fought Bellator and UFC.
Yes, that's another one. Correct. So, and by the way, I want to make this statement. It is in no way, shape, or form a insult to Wolves Den to say that St. Charles MMA is like the top dog, because it's like it's the same thing that we say with the promotions. Competition is a healthy thing.
Yep.
I would venture to say that what keeps St. Charles MMA good is that you have a Wolves Den like saying like, hey, if you guys slip up for a second, we're gonna come and take that spot. And that's what you need. You need some healthy competition.
Great.
You need gyms to compete against one another. That's one of the things that the promotions right now are falling kind of ill of. There's not enough gyms and everybody trains with everybody because everyone's cross-training, which is good, but then it makes it very difficult to like pit people against each other at the amateur level. Professional level, I don't think anybody locally should be fighting anybody locally. I don't care what anybody says. But at the amateur level, it becomes tough because everybody's everybody's friend. Everybody cross-trains with everybody. Oh, I train with that guy. We need to get somebody in from out of town. You know, these promotions are only making $5,000 to $10,000 profit a show. All this additional travel. It's the right thing to do, but it's a hard thing to do. Yada, yada. Sid, almost 3 hours.
We got it.
I hope this was it what you expected?
Yeah, I have fun.
Yeah, I did too.
Never got a chance to really sit down and talk with you before.
We've talked in passing and stuff like that.
Been a long time, though.
We were always busy. It was
Yeah.
behind the scenes. You were repping hands. I was getting ready for a fight, or I was cornering somebody. We should do this again. This was
It was fun. I really enjoyed it.
Is there, before we call it quits or anything like that, is there one more thing you want to say or get off your chest or maybe make like an announcement? Or
I got some really good sponsors that have really helped me out through the years.
throw them out.
You know Nick Sampson from HKA USA?
Yeah.
Nick is one of my great sponsors. Mike Jodis, I teach it 2 days a week at his gym called the Fitness Edge in Creve Coeur. It's the
nice.
largest personal training service in the Midwest.
Wow.
He has 20 trainers, 1,000 clients.
Jesus.
And
And you do karate there as well?
I teach karate there on Thursdays and Fridays.
Nice.
And then I have Walker, who makes earmuffs, one of my big sponsors.
Earmuffs for what? Like
Shooting.
cold?
For
shooting
shooting.
earmuffs. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
They make shooting products and stuff.
Do you like shooting?
Oh, yeah. My brother was in the business for years.
Okay.
Yeah. He developed shooting backpacks, all kinds of cool stuff. But yeah, those people have been with me forever.
I'll tell
and
you what.
supported me. And War Tape, Mike Rodriguez. I've been using War Tape for about 15 years now.
I'll tell you what. I'll give you my email when we're done with this, and if you give me an email with their logos, we'll incorporate it into the episode.
Cool.
Because that's one of the things. I don't have sponsors for a multitude of reasons, but maybe one day we will. I'm not saying that we will never have sponsors, but for right now we don't. But I do like the idea of promoting the people that promote us.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
Sid, dude, it was an absolute pleasure. I had a great time.
I appreciate it, man. It was fun.
Dude, thank you.
Thank you, brother.